So this happened back when I was 17. I can't remember exactly why I was walking down the street, but it was a rather dangerous street in the city, and pretty late at night. I walked past a private showgirl house, where girls were trying to attract customers. Came across the druggie house to give you an idea of where I was. Along my walk, I passed a dark parking lot, and suddenly I heard a man say, "Hey," in a hushed tone. Turning around, I searched and found an absolute unit of a man lurking in the shadows, his face hidden. "Yes?" I answered timidly. He proceeded to flirt with me, complimenting me a lot and trying to offer to take me out to dinner. Literally, at that time, no restaurants were open. I was very shy and scared back then, and I politely declined, but he just wouldn't stop his badgering. He was determined to take me out somewhere, presumably on a date. Finally, after a few minutes of straight declining, he started walking towards me very quickly. I braced myself, going into a defensive position when he stopped just at the end of the parking lot, before the lights. I still couldn't see him well. Then, he said in a smooth, calm tone that pretty girls like me should be careful. That he knew that there was men around here picking up girls in a white truck, raping them, murdering them, and dumping their bodies. Fully freaked out, alarms blaring in my head, I started to walk backwards, away from the creep. That's when I saw what I always will remember. He walked over to a car in a dark part of the lot that I hadn't noticed, opened the car door and got into the white truck. I turned around and sprinted away, hearing him rev his engine and tear out of the parking lot. Thankfully I lost him, cutting through other areas and sprinting like a madman. But Jesus Christ, I'll never forget that absolutely terrifying man. This started in September 2018. I just started college and didn't have many friends there. The only person I spoke to was my ex-boyfriend. He introduced me to this woman, Kat, who was 27. Despite our age difference, we got along pretty well. Then my ex-boyfriend dropped out of college and I started to talk to Kate more and more, and we became pretty good friends. I would stay at hers. We'd get high and watch TV. Pretty fun, right? Then it got weird. She wanted me to stay at hers 2 or more times a week, often ringing me every other day, and even phoning me 13 times in the space of a few weeks asking me to go over. She then moved out of the city and moved to Manchester to go to uni. She asked me to stay at hers just after my birthday for 2 weeks. This was the longest I had ever been without my family, but I went anyway. Most of it was good, except for the time I got kicked out so she could work. She was a sex worker. She also gave me a necklace that said something about me being her daughter. About 2 weeks after, I go back to the city and she called me again. She told me that she had 2 psychotic breakdowns and that she could barely remember anything that happened over the last 3 days. She said she had been retained in a hospital and she tried to kill her best friend. She also made it a point to say that she was okay until I left, basically trying to blame me for her breakdown. Any rational person would have cut the shit off right then and there, but I guess I'm too nice. I didn't want to tell my friends or my ex-boyfriends what she's done. I just kept it to myself, carried on as normal, until she said something about my boyfriend that changed everything. My boyfriend and I were talking about moving out of my city when we go to university, and he told Kat and his friends this at college. She then said, "You're still in my Kimmy." That was the final straw. I told my boyfriend what she had done, and he obviously wanted me to stop associating with her. She then sent me messages asking me to meet her after college, making it a point to say, just the 2 of us. This is obviously terrifying, and I blocked her on social media and her phone number. She then gets another 17-year-old on my boyfriend's college course to ask why we have been bullying her. It was incredibly pathetic, and I was left wondering who else she would include. After this, she left me a long string of messages saying that I was not to tell anyone anything she told me, as I should respect her privacy. I left it on read. So Kat, let's not meet again. I came from Siberia at the age of 13 with my mother. My older brother, who is 15 years older than me, lived in America for a few years when he sent for us. My mom wouldn't be staying, although at the time I wasn't aware of that. Anyway, we landed in New York City, and the plan was my brother coming to get us. However, my niece decided to come early, and my brother's wife went into labor shortly before we landed. My brother couldn't leave his wife, so we asked a coworker of his, who drove cabs, to pick us up in New York City and drive us to New Jersey, where him and my sister-in-law lived. When we got to New York City, we waited in customs for what seemed like forever. We looked for my brother but didn't see him. This was the early 90s and cell phones weren't as common, and even if they were, my mom and I didn't have one. We panicked a bit after not seeing my brother or sister-in-law. Suddenly we heard our names being called and saw a tall man. He introduced himself in perfect Siberian and explained he was a good friend of my brother's, and then told us about the baby. He said that he would be driving us 2 hours from the airport to my brother's home. My mom relaxed, and they happily began to converse about the baby and my brother and America. I, however, just felt off. This guy gave me bad vibes, regardless of my brother's friendship with him, and I felt distrustful of him. We drove for a good hour and a half when he announced he was going to take us for breakfast. We hadn't eaten for over 15 hours, and we were starving by then. We pulled up to a house, and my mom and I were confused. He insisted cheerfully that his wife was cooking us breakfast, and we would drive the rest of the way to the hospital to see my family. My mom shushed me when I whispered something didn't feel right, and told me we needed to be grateful for the hospitality. We were led into the house. It was dark, dank, and dirty. Suddenly, I think my mom finally got a bit nervous and started insisting that he take us to my brother. He grabbed my mom by the wrist and told her that he needed a wife to take care of him and his house, and then said he heard my brother telling the others at work that she'd be coming to stay, and at that time he knew he found a wife. I, at the time, was a scrawny little scrap of a kid, and I tried pushing him off my mom, but he just hit me so hard that I saw stars. At this point, we were terrified. Neither of us spoke English. We only knew my brother's home number, and he was at the hospital. Also, in Siberia, you don't dial 911, so even if I could, I didn't know how to call the police. Anyway, he tells my mom to clean and cook for him, and he takes me into the basement, where I was locked in what I now know was called a laundry room. I banged and cried and yelled, but it was so far down in the basement, everything was muffled. For a week, we were kept in his home. He locked us up in the basement after my mom cooked him breakfast, and he just let us out when he came home at 4. If we had to use the restroom, there was a bathroom, but that was it. Just a bathroom and a laundry room. It was freezing cold down there. Even when we were huddling together under a blanket, it did nothing. One morning, I discovered a small window by climbing on some boxes. I managed to open it, and my mother insisted I squeeze through it. I didn't want to leave her, and besides, how would I get help? I couldn't read nor speak the language. However, I didn't want to live this way for the rest of my life, so I did as she asked. I ran once I got out, and I'm sure I was a sight. A scrawny boy with no shoes, only wearing shorts and a t-shirt in the middle of November. However, this is what saved us, as several concerned neighbors tried to get me to come to them, and I wouldn't. I was terrified. I kept trying to get them to follow me. The police were called, and a very nice policeman tried to get me to go into his car. I then saw the man who had drove us up in his taxi. He saw the cops and took off. That's when I made a run for his house to get my mom. Needless to say, the cop and his partner ran after me, and my mother was rescued. It took about 4 hours for them to find someone who spoke our language for us to tell them what happened. A warrant was issued for the man. My brother was contacted. His friend had told him that we never showed up, and my brother had been frantically calling back to Siberia to try to find us. He drove up to get us, and to give the cops information on his supposed friend so they could find him. They never did find him though. Back then, before 9/11, it was easier for someone to disappear. However, it made me distrustful for a long time of people and their intentions. My mother grew homesick, and she ended up going back to Siberia. I stayed and finished school. I ended up becoming a cop in the military thanks to the nice police officer that helped me all those years ago. I think of the guy who kept us as prisoners every now and then, and honestly, I wouldn't mind meeting him now. I just don't think he would want to meet me. Rewind to my 4th or 5th grade year. My grandma from Alaska had drove her motorhome down to Florida where I live. She brought her beagle, Ginger. My friends, who were siblings, lived about 10 to 15 minutes walk away from my house, and I wanted to show them my grandma's dog since I was already taking her out for a walk. I'd gotten about 5 minutes from my house, so literally down the road just a little bit, and I crossed the main drag. A little bit further down is a church. My house at the time and the church's property are bordering each other. I'm on the opposite side of the road where the church is, and there's a small circle driveway. So Ginger stopped to smell some of the bushes. I'm just like, okay, smell, and we can go. Then, a guy in a white truck with a small trailer pulls up and parks there. I didn't really think anything of it. He gets out and leaves the door open. I look over, and there's a girl, maybe 7 or 8, in the passenger seat. Her knees are against her chest, and she looks scared. The guy hollers at me from across the street, so naturally I look over. He says, "I'm not gonna hurt you," over and over again, and he starts crossing the road. I'm starting to freak out, and start pulling on Ginger's leash, but she's way into the bushes and won't budge. He gets halfway across the street, and there are no cars. He asked me the most bizarre thing I've ever heard. "Do you know anyone that sells babies?" I looked to my side, really anxiously, trying to think of some kind of lie to get him to go down the street or something, just to get him away from me. But I ended up saying, no, sorry. And Ginger finally was done, so I started to book it back home. He left, said nothing else, and drove away. I totally forgot about the girl in the truck. I'm walking across the street back home, and some guy in a bug exterminator truck tells me he saw what happened and asks me if I'm okay. I just say yes, still being creeped out about talking to literally anyone else. He left shortly after, and I walked into my house and told my mom and grandmother. They were horrified that it happened so close, and they had no idea. My mom called the cops, and they took a description from me via the phone, but it was really bad because all I know is he was a little bit taller than me at the time, maybe 30, was Hispanic, and had a white truck with a trailer. I remember my stepdad pulling up people who got arrested recently and asked me if I recognized any of them. Of course I didn't though. Years later, I really hope that girl was doing fine. I just hope that was his daughter, being really creeped out by him. Also, I hope no kids were taken by him. It was a really nerve-wracking experience. This happened to me when I was in college, about 6 years ago, at around 5:30 p.m. after class. I had just said goodbye to my friend, and as we made our separate ways, suddenly a guy with a hoodie blocked my way. The moment the guy was in front of me, he hugged me, grabbed my head close to his chest. He also slapped me in the face and asked me, "Why are you still not home?" I was dumbfounded. I didn't know this guy. At first, I thought he had mistaken me for someone else. I also thought he was drunk. But then, he started grabbing me to walk with him. I shouted for my friend to help. Fortunately, she was still near. She grabbed my arm and started to play tug of war with the guy. There were a lot of people there at the moment. The guy shouted, "Don't bother us. This is my wife." My friend also shouted, "Please help us. This is my classmate." Nobody dared to help. We were making a scene outside of school on a rush hour, and everyone was just watching. We felt so helpless. I remember seeing a few familiar faces from school, but they didn't move. I guess they were all as shocked as I was. I was also paralyzed at the time, unable to detach myself from this guy. Another guy came around and shouted, "I'll shoot you." He tried to help the other guy, grabbing me from my friend. One of my schoolmates tried to help, but the other guy just punched him. Afterwards, the guy punched me, hitting my face. They also punched my friend, who was brave enough not to let me go. We kept shouting for help this time. A nearby street vendor came to help us and shouted, "She's a student. We should help." As she came near us, the guy punched her also. The street vendor came with her dog. After the guy punched her, her dog bit the guy. The dog proceeded to bite the guy that was hugging me the entire time. Then they both ran away, while the dog chased after them. The experience was really traumatic. I had to change my daily outfits for months after that, so these two guys would not recognize me if we met somewhere. I'm a dog lover, and having been saved by a dog really is heartwarming. For a while, when I was still in college, I'd see the street vendor and the dog on some occasions, and am truly grateful. This happened back in 2016 on Christmas Eve night. We had just gotten back from my sister's, and we were sitting in the car for a few. It was fairly cold, keep this in mind. Also, side note, we had a bunch of cats, so at first we hadn't thought anything of it. We sat there for about 10 minutes and we heard some rustling. Not thinking anything of it because we had the cats, we blew it off. Not even a minute later, we heard it again. My mom just happened to look up, and there was a bald man in a wife beater and shorts. My mom and I both had that uneasy feeling because of his choice of clothing. It was 32 degrees and he was in summertime clothes. My mom has her window cracked and he's barely a foot away from the car. My mom yelled out to him and said, "Back away from our car," which, surprise, he didn't. He continued to stand there and stare at us. My mom decided to try to scare him. She yelled out to him that she had a gun and she would blow his shit away. Exact words. She didn't have her gun on her, but she definitely made sure he thought she did. He threw his hands up, but continued to get closer to the car. My mom threw her phone at me, and I was told to dial 911. I told the dispatcher what was going on, and she said that she would have a police there right away. My mom proceeded to try to run him down, but he went between two porches, and our car couldn't fit there because how close the two porches were. Finally, about a half fucking hour later, the cops showed up and took our statement. The station was literally down the road from us, and if he had actually tried something, I felt that it would have been way too late. So I was pissed off that it took so long for the cops to show up. The cops stayed and looked everywhere but couldn't find him. My mom and I didn't sleep that night, or finishing opening up presents, because of the fear that he would come back. The police thought maybe he wanted to steal some gifts that were in the car, but we may never know. The scariest part is, months later it came to light that he escaped jail. He was put in for assault, so who knows what he would have done to me and my mom. This happened a few years ago while I was still in my hometown. I was going for a late night walk in the early AM, which was fairly common, and I always felt relatively safe and street smart to avoid bad situations. My walk would often take me all over town, though my favorite was a park we had down by the river, although it was known for a hangout spot for weirdos and druggies so late. I walked there plenty of times and never encountered any problems. So I went down there again to enjoy the breezy river air. The walk to the park itself was uneventful. The park was unfenced and easy to get into, open to the public. And looking from the park itself, you could see an opening to the beach river along it. There needed to be an opening because the beach was just a bit of a drop off. You had to take a moderate step down from the concrete supporting the park itself to get into the sand. And anyway, from this opening, the disparity between the concrete steps and the beach became such a length that they needed a fencing so as to prevent people from falling off and hurting themselves. Basically, everywhere not the beach led to a major drop-off into a sparse line of sand and muddy area. with the only thing separating you from the drop was either fencing or a major tree line. So I'm walking through the park. There's nobody around. It's absolutely silent until the hooting of some owls break it. I'm surprised because owls were rare in those parts at this time of year, but I ignore it and continue walking as it continues hooting. As I meandered closer to where it sounded, I noticed two things. The owl sounded like it was in pain, and that it was on the ground. I really got concerned for it and wanted to help it, so I started going over to where the hooting was coming from, though tentatively, because even right then, a weird chill climbed up my spine, though I couldn't say why. I get closer, and it sounded louder, more hurt, and definitely on the ground, in the same place. I kept walking closer and hear it right behind the tree line, after the drop-off point. For more of the park's layout, anywhere you pass the tree line led to a drop that was just a thin line of earth separating you from the water, like a gorge. If you jumped down, you were relatively stuck because you couldn't go further for the water. Climbing back was a nightmarish for all the roots of the trees jutting out, and going left or right would have forced you to follow an extremely narrow path with little room. This owl was right behind the drop-off point, so even getting closer I couldn't see it. The owl kept hooting, and I got right in front of the trees. I could hear it right under me. All I had to do was jump down, and I would see it, and be able to get it. But I didn't. The weird feeling, this chills up my back, kept getting higher and higher, and more intense the closer I got. And my conscious brain finally picked up why. I started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the owl hooted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It hooted again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And it sounded again and again. I finally realized why I was creeped out and why my subconscious brain was screaming at me to run away. It wasn't an owl. It was a recording. A recording of a wounded owl on the ground, waiting for anyone to come with the intention to help it. Past the tree line obscuring their vision, past a drop where you couldn't climb back up from, and on a small path where you couldn't run at all, where someone, anyone could be waiting. It was a lure, meant to lead someone into a trap. I suddenly felt very cold and clammy, and like I was being watched. I immediately turned and started speed walking away, taking the nearest exit out of the park onto as many lit streets as I could, all the way home, constantly checking back to see if I was being followed. I stayed up the entire night, fully paranoid, and looking out my window to see if I could see if anyone was there, though nothing bad ever happened, and no one ever tried to get me. The next night, I went back with my sister's cell phone with the intent to call the police and report it if I heard it again, but no hooting occurred. Upon a more thorough inspection, nobody seemed to be laying in wait. I kept an eye on the newspaper for a bit after that too, to check if anyone else reported similar things happening, or God forbid, if anyone got hurt in a similar incident. But nobody ever did, and it never happened to me again. This is the end of my story, and while I do continue to take night walks, I carry a weapon on me to defend myself, and always make a point to trust my instincts. So this happened back when I was in middle school. On my 8th grade year, my class went to Yosemite National Park for a week. It was beautiful there. So where we had to stay is one of those teeny cabins that could fit about 4 people, which was a damn shame because I brought camping supplies. We were told that there would be 4 single beds, but one of them was a double, so 2 people would have to sleep together. My 2 friends claimed the single beds, forcing me and the other kid to take the bed. The other guy was kind enough to inform me that he had been getting wet dreams, so I decided to blow up my mat and sleep on the ground. About 2 days in, the spare time between hikes and activities were annoying. I took it upon myself to build a lean-to out of sticks. I covered it with pine needles to make it covered. Around dusk, some of the jerky kids decided to try to destroy it. A rumor was going around that I was going to sleep outside like an actual camper. Getting sick of fending off my lean-to, I decided to eat some fruit and put the leftovers underneath the cabin and into the lean-to. What was going through my head was, if there were night attacks, they'd get mauled by bears. It was about 2 a.m. when I woke up to loud smacking. I looked outside and saw a big black shape wandering around. This thing was big. I accidentally creaked one of the boards underneath me, and the thing, which I now realize was a very large bear, turned around and walked towards our cabin. It got as close as 10 inches away from my head. The only thing standing between me was a very cheap screen door. I didn't move. Its breath was hot and smelled metallic. It kept smacking its mouth, and I was panicking. I tried to scream for help, or at least wake up one of my cabin mates, but nothing came out. I felt like it was looking right at me. I heard a noise behind the cabin, and the shape went after it. I fainted. The next morning there was footprints of a bear, as well as mud marks on the outside of the cabin. The weird thing is, there was a streak row of muddy finger streaks. My friends didn't believe me until later on they heard that one of the counselors was chased by a bear nearby. One night, about 4 years ago, as a 17 or 18-year-old female, I was making an hour drive home down a long straight stretch of highway, coming from visiting my boyfriend at college. I think we saw a concert or something, because it was very late by the time I started to go home, and I was very tired. Realizing that if I didn't stop to get some type of energy drink, I would fall asleep at the wheel, I decided to exit for the closest gas station. Don't really know why I didn't drive straight through, looking back, but I digress. I walk into a 24-hour gas station, and upon entering, I noticed two men, the cashier behind the counter, and a man sitting at a lunch table across the entrance from the other. They're talking to each other as well, but stop abruptly when I enter, and have to walk past the two of them. This was my red flag number 1, but I needed a drink for the almost 45-minute drive I had left, so I tried my best to seem unfazed, and I went to the Rockstar fridge to see what I wanted. I turned to look at another fridge when I noticed out of the corner of my eye the man at the table had gotten up and started shopping around the small store too. They also resumed talking, in what I now realized was a foreign language. I grabbed an energy drink and quickly walked down to pay, because the full realization of panic that I'm quite vulnerable here, and these two rather tall and large men at 2 a.m. talking about something I didn't know set all the way in. I set my drink on the counter. Luckily, I thought to get out the $5 in hand before I got out of my car. The cashier didn't scan it right away and typed on his computer. He said hello and asked me questions. How's your night going? Where are you headed to? By the second question, I truly don't remember if I answered or nodded, because just before the next thing he said, I feel the man, now right behind me, grab a random bag off the shelf and get behind me to pay. The next thing the cashier says still shakes me when I think about it. Not because of the words themselves, "You look beautiful tonight," but because how he said it. I could tell he looked directly at the man standing behind me. In that moment, flight mode kicked in, and I grabbed the drink I went through all this for, and proceeded to throw the $5 on the counter and dash out the door to my car. Pulling away and looking in the rearview mirror, to my horror I see both men running out the door and stopping to watch me pull away. I think about it all the time, and whether or not I overreacted. Maybe the men just ran out after me to figure out what the hell I was running for, or why I didn't get my change. Maybe I got the luckiest I've ever been in my life and escaped being killed or worse. I didn't tell anyone for a while because I was so embarrassed for how stupid it was that I got myself in that situation. I now realize that it's kind of a effed up mentality, and I should have reported it, or something. Anybody can happen upon unfortunate situations, but it's about your actions in the moment, not worrying about how it looks, or being polite or whatever. It's about what you do to survive. A little background. I've always been a smart kid, never afraid to ask why, until I finally got an answer. One day I heard the phrase Amber Alert and asked my mother. She explained to me what it meant as well as the origin of the name. We didn't have much money growing up, and we were on WIC for a time. It was even more restrictive then than it is now, so I'd frequently have to run to the back of the store to swap out for the correct item and not hold up the line. I was also very independent, and I had a watch so my mother could tell me, meet me at the milk in 10 minutes, and I could go browse the books section as I was easily bored. Due to an incident at the museum years back, my parents instructed me that if I ever got separated from them, to seek out an employee and tell them my parents' names, which I needed to do a few times. These things happened back when I was around 7 to 10 years old in the 90s, on more than one occasion. Here's my most vivid memory. I'd saved enough money to buy a toy and was given permission to go pick one out. Lego was too expensive, but I wanted to look at them anyway. I was checking the prices just in case when I hear a voice. It's not my mom or brother, so I ignored it. I hear it again and turn around to look. It's an older person. Now, a lot of adults look old to children, but I placed her as older than my mom, at least 40, if not 50. She asked me if I was lost. I told her no, and that I knew where my mom was, and I was just looking. Okay then, she replies and grabs my arm, starting to drag me with her. I didn't exactly go to the nicest school, and had been involved in several fights as early as kindergarten. I was later diagnosed with both mood disorder and PTSD, which helped explain my school problems, as well as demonstrate how little help I received. My parents always said to me after each call from the principal that I shouldn't default to violence as we were pacifists, which I tried to keep in mind, but my temper still got the best of me. I tell her to let me go. She doesn't listen. I start trying to tug free and begin yelling that I'm not going to go with her and she needs to let me go. She still doesn't let me go, so I start hitting her with my hand and arm, kicking, and beginning to scream for help. A few people walk over and ask what's going on. I quickly explain and she finally lets me go. She then claims that she was just helping me as I was lost, and I am then scolded by bystanders for being disrespectful, because clearly this old woman was just lonely and meant no harm. I'm then allowed to leave and run to my mom. I'm more confused than upset at this point, and tell her what happened. My mom tells me that I went violent and that was wrong, and she didn't seem convinced that I was telling the full truth, as I tended to exaggerate back then, and she didn't believe me that I was grabbed. I don't remember if I had bruises or not. Walmart seems to attract real pieces of work, because I found myself in more than a few similar situations over the years, by both genders, and of many ages. To give the context of where the story is based, I live in a small college town near a small to medium-sized city. The town itself doesn't have a lot of people, and it's mostly here to cater to the demand that comes from the college. Because of this, the stores around the college are mostly open 24/7, so that the college kids will be able to impulse buy whatever they like. The other big seller around here is gas. Of course, gas can be bought in the city, but being in a town that is often gone through in order to get to the city, a lot of places will try to keep the prices of gas slightly lower than any of the gas stations in the city. My story begins when I was working overnight in a gas station liquor store, when I was doing part-time classes in college, but mostly doing classes online. That way, it wouldn't ruin my availability for a full-time job. The store that I worked at only had one person on overnights for a long time, even though a lot of people, especially girls, would complain of the lack of cameras and the fact that you don't always get the best people going into liquor stores in the middle of the night. The owner's hand was forced one night before I started working there. A woman who came in to buy milk went outside to her car, only for a man to come up behind her and shove a gun to her back, demanding for money. She complied, and luckily, he let her go. She ran into the store, sobbing hysterically, and, though the police arrived shortly after, he was never found. I personally preferred having two people on, even if there wasn't a safety issue. The night seemed to go by so much quicker when someone else was there. and it was really nice that that person I normally close with and I got along so well. Overall, there were 4 overnight shift workers: Josh, Nick, Dixie, and myself. Dixie had another job and really was only working there as a favor to one of the managers, so she would only work 2 overnights a week with either Josh or myself. Josh and I worked together 3 nights a week, and Nick worked with Josh or me 2 nights a week. Dixie was really nice and fun to be around, but she didn't really like the job or want to be there. Josh would get annoyed with her a lot for just standing behind the register while he did all the work. But it was only 1 night a week, so he didn't really complain too much. Nick, on the other hand, was a bit different. He worked there 5 days a week, just like Josh and I, but they never seemed to put him with one person more than 1 day a week. Nobody really seemed to like him or like working with him. Nick was a little off from the start. He was one of those people who told you his entire life story as soon as he met you, giving a bunch of really personal details that no one was really comfortable hearing. One thing he always seemed to talk about was the strain on his marriage. Apparently, he had a really bad drinking and drug problem for a very long time, and the drug part got better when he could switch over to weed, but he couldn't seem to get the drinking under control. He was hard to be around, but you kind of get used to people in that kind of job being sketchy. I was there for 3 months when Nick's story seemed to escalate out of nowhere. He began telling people that when he was younger, he was diagnosed as a psychopath, and he had to take a bunch of pills for it every day so he wouldn't become violent. Not exactly what you want to hear from someone you're alone with in the middle of the night, but okay. We all have our problems, and some people get dealt a bad hand when it comes to mental illness. I myself have always struggled to get my anxiety and depression under control, and without medicine, I wouldn't be killing people by any means, but I'd probably be hospitalized in danger to self categories. So, creepy as it was, I assured him that a lot of people had to take medicine for some kind of illness, and as long as you stick to it and are honest with medical professionals, there's no reason that you can't do anything that anyone else can. He seemed pleased with my answer, and soon after, the subject turned to other things. He was especially cheery and nice to me after that for the next week or so, letting me know daily that he was taking his medicine and felt like things were going well with him. I always answered enthusiastically, but I'm pretty sure everyone, especially Josh, was aware of how much I wish he would just stop talking about it and would leave me alone. Josh had a wife and a daughter who was 2 at the time, so he couldn't help but see us younger girls through the eyes of what his daughters might potentially have to deal with when they're the same age. He seemed to go out of his way to end my conversations with Nick rather quickly, which I was grateful for, and didn't really try to pretend that he liked Nick. It wasn't long before Nick started conversations with me, going into details about why he was diagnosed instead of how his medicine was working, which I won't get into here because a lot of it was very violent and sexual. I told him repeatedly that I didn't want to know about that, to which he would act like he understood and change the subject, only for him to circle back to it about an hour later. When I confided to Dixie about it, she told me that she was going to take care of it and told her friend, which was the manager who had asked her to work there. The manager couldn't really do much, since I seemed to be the only one that he would talk to about these things, and told me to come to her again if he ever made me feel uncomfortable. It was starting to get increasingly tense for everyone working with him after he was talked to by the manager, and soon enough 2 other women who worked with him on the night shift reported comments he had made to them. I was questioned, in which I agreed that all the statements made by the women were similar things that he had said to me. Nick was given a final warning and a write-up. The next couple of times I saw him, he would go on rants about the people there, that they were only reporting him because they didn't like him. I assumed he didn't know that I had been questioned too, and neither Josh or I had any intention to tell him. He got so angry at one point that he was practically in tears, saying how lucky these bitches were that he was on his meds, and what he would do to them if he wasn't. Luckily, it was about that point that his shift ended, and pretty much soon after he clocked out. Josh told him that we had a lot of work to get done that night, so we didn't really have time to chat with him. He nodded and walked out the door without another word. Josh wasn't lying either. The truck had came extremely late that day, so there was still quite a bit of things that still needed to get done and put on the shelf. One thing that earlier shifts never seemed to do, unless they absolutely had to, was stocking the drink coolers. It was true. It was easier to do it at night when there was less customers, so it was annoying since we couldn't chat, but we just went with it. I can't remember the time that Josh went into the drink cooler, but it must have been pretty late since we had been there for a while at that point. I was focused on stocking the shelves and making sure everything looked full if we didn't have it, when the bell chimed, signaling someone had came in. I threw out a good evening and that I'd be right there, since anyone that came in that late usually wanted a pack of cigarettes or to pay for gas in cash. I put down my box and went to the register. Slowly, dramatically, once I could see them, you guessed it, there was Nick, not looking at me, but leaning next to my register. I'd be lying if I said I had a reason to be afraid. It turned out that he was drunk, but I couldn't detect it right away from the smell of the booze that always seemed to linger in the air around there. Josh was on the other side of the wall. Even so, I considered for about 30 seconds if I should actually go or if I should run inside the cooler to get Josh. Nick wasn't a young fit guy or anything. Years of drugs and drinking had aged him prematurely and ruined his body, but he was still intimidating to a 20-year-old girl. Unfortunately, Nick made the decision for me, probably tired of waiting. He turned towards me, and that's when I noticed immediately that something was off about him. My voice was nothing more than a pathetic whisper when I asked him what he wanted. He just stared at me, nothing of his face to tell me what he was thinking. I was about to speak again when he spoke. Barely intelligible because of his slurring. "He leave you here alone?" It took me a second to shake my head and tell him in a hopefully steady voice that Josh was in the cooler, and I asked him if he wanted me to go get him. Again, staring at me in silence. At this point, I didn't even care what he said. I just wanted him to say something. The silent staring was creeping me out. I asked him with more force in my voice, "What do you want, Nick?" As soon as I stopped speaking, he grinned at me, and in a disgusting, almost singing voice he said, "You're lying. You are alone." He laughed and took a step towards me, but stumbled, allowing me to take several steps back. At this point, I should have ran for Josh. I should have called for him, anything, but I couldn't believe that I was reading the situation right. Nick was really weird, but I had never felt actual danger around him before. He had never come off as more as a little unstable. He continued forward in his slow, stumbling steps, telling me to come here. I just want to talk. I kept out of his reach, telling him to back off and that I would hurt him if I had to. Josh was out the door in a second and seemed to come out of nowhere, shoving himself between me and Nick. They didn't even say anything. They just stared at each other before Josh said in a stern tone, "I think you should leave now." Nick stared blankly for a moment, then scoffed, telling us that we couldn't take a joke. I was trying not to cry at this point. The only thing more terrifying about the situation was knowing that if Josh hadn't been there, and he somehow caught me, I would have stood no chance against him. Josh left me standing with my back against the wall, corralling Nick to the door, completely unexpected on both of our parts. Nick turned and took a swing at Josh. Luckily, either because he was drunk or really uncoordinated, he missed Josh's face. Josh grabbed the back of his coat and brought him down as he smashed his knee into Nick's stomach and chest area. He used this opportunity of his sputtering to drag him out the door and throw him out, locking it. Josh had just turned to me to tell me to call the cops when we heard the sickening crack from behind him. We both jumped and looked at the door, only to find this big circle of glass. It's hard to explain, But if you've ever seen a movie of one, or an actual car wreck, when something hits the windshield, but not hard enough to break through, and it turns white all around the point of impact, that's what the door looked like. Josh didn't have to tell me what to do this time. I ran to the register and grabbed my phone, going to the furthest corner away from the front door, and huddled on the floor. I didn't even notice at the time, but Josh told me later, when he turned to see the glass, that was the first time he noticed that Nick had a hunting knife in his other hand. The fact that he tried to punch Josh instead of stabbing him is a mystery and a miracle. I was sobbing when the operator picked up the phone. I don't even know if she understood me, but between my distress and the sounds of Josh and Nick yelling at each other in the background with loud smashes of Nick hitting the door, she got the urgency of the situation. She asked me where I was, and luckily she knew the address, because just as I got up to look at the register to see what the address was, the glass smashed. I dropped back down onto the floor, and she told me that officers were already on their way and to do whatever I could to get away or hide, even if I had to leave Josh. The hole wasn't big enough for him to get through, and he had made the hole by grabbing an ashtray from the outside and throwing it at the part of the window that he had repeatedly been punching, causing it to break through. He didn't make it to break through though. From that hole, he could reach inside and unlock the door. According to Josh, he walked to the door and put his mouth against the hole that he had just formed and said something that I'm sobbing right now, even thinking about. In a horrible, sing-song voice that he used the first time I talked to him that night, he said in a happy tone, "They're never gonna find you two." Needless to say, as tough as he was acting, Josh was shitting bricks as much as I was. He was older than Nick, in his mid-30s, but he was a beanpole and wasn't exactly known for his fighting skills. Even so, as soon as Nick unlocked and started opening the door, Josh slammed his body into it, knocking Nick backwards from the impact. Josh yelled for me to run, and even though my legs felt like they would give in at any moment, I ran right behind him to the receiving doors in the back of the store. Nick was cursing and yelling for us as the door jingle went off. Josh slammed into the back door, cursing in pain as he realized it wouldn't open. We found out later that Nick had pushed the dumpster in front of the back door, locking the wheels before he came in. We seemed to both realize when that happened that he was actually planning to kill us. Nick rounded the corner, still doing his awkward stumbling walk, though faster now. It at least gave me enough time to slam the receiving door shut and lock it. I was sitting in front of it, Josh bringing over anything he could find to barricade the door shut. When Nick reached the door, he must have heard me crying, because he kept calling out my name, telling me I wasn't who he wanted, and that he would make sure I died before I even felt the pain, if I opened the door for him. He started stabbing the door, screaming at me to open it. I screamed and moved when he stabbed it the first time, but Josh and I both moved immediately to hold and shut the door again. I remember Josh and I making eye contact. We were both crying, and I wanted so badly to say something to comfort him, but I couldn't think of anything to say. I had dropped my phone when I ran to hold the door shut, and neither of us could move to get it. So we had no idea how long until the police would get there, and the door was made out of wood, so it wouldn't last for long against his body slams, and offered no protection if his knife went into one of our hands. All I could think about is that I was gonna die here, that my dog would never know why I didn't come home, that I would never get my degree, and never have enough money to actually start enjoying life, that all my plans that I had made would never happen. It suddenly went silent. There was no police car sirens, no yelling, nothing. It was as if Nick just vanished. Josh and I looked at each other, not even daring to breathe, just listening for signs of life on the other side of the door. We both slammed to the ground when a gunshot went off, then twice, then a third time. There was more silence. Then a voice rang out, asking if anyone was here. We weren't sure if we should say anything. Then the voice continued with his name, and that he was an off-duty EMT who had been listening to the scanner. Josh got up and pushed the things to the side that were blocking the door. He opened it just enough to put his head out, and then it seemed like all his breath just left him. He opened the door and went out into the store, relief all over him. I ran to grab my phone, seeing that the call was disconnected or the dispatcher had hung up. When I went out into the store, where Josh and a rescuer were, he was in the middle of explaining how the police over the scanner were sending a bunch of cars, but that they were pretty far away, and that he had a horrible feeling that they weren't going to get there in time, when the dispatcher was telling them what they would find when they got there. He didn't want either of us to go outside until the police got there. Though Nick had been shot in the shoulder, he still had a knife when he took off. The EMT said that he was going to run after him, but with the state that the store was in, he was scared that someone was in here that could be dying or hurt. The next 20 minutes were a blur. Josh and I sitting on the floor, hugging each other, when the police got there. The EMT had called dispatch and told them of the new situation, and most of the cars that were coming to our location were diverted to looking for Nick. It was soon after that Josh got to use his phone to call his wife, and she came right over, only bringing their daughter because he begged her to. He seemed to completely break down when he held his daughter and hugged his wife. I had an extremely similar reaction when I finally got home and came in to see my dog's body wiggling excitedly, proudly displaying his flamingo toy for me to have as a welcome home gift. Nick was found 2 weeks later in an old RV in the woods that he had been using to do his drinking and do drugs so that his wife wouldn't catch him. Apparently, the reason why he had came after us was because he thought that the reason that Josh wanted him to leave so quickly was so that he could call the owner, and the complaint would have got him fired. Unknown to us, his wife had kicked him out 4 days earlier and was in the process of getting a restraining order against him over threatening texts and phone calls she had been getting. He stated that his job was all that he had left, and Josh needed to be punished for trying to take it away from him. He said that I wasn't the target, and that he didn't want to have to kill me, but that he knew that he had a much better chance of killing Josh with me there than Dixie, since Josh would be more likely to face him to protect me. Neither Josh or I called the owner, or even a manager, over his comments that night, though we probably should have. It was disturbing what he was saying in hindsight, but we were used to him being a creep and saying really horrible things at that point, that it didn't even register to us that he could be serious about trying to hurt someone. I had known him for 3 months, and Josh knew him for about 6, and he had never done anything violent towards anyone. Everyone just thought it was all talk. The reason why I'm writing this story now, other than other stories on the sub inspiring me, is that I got a call 2 weeks ago notifying me that as long as there were no setbacks to his health status, Nick is set to be released on June 8th of this year. When I called Josh, he said he received the same news the day before. Neither Josh or I work there anymore, and Josh has since moved to a town on the other side of the city, and I have switched to going to college completely online and am in a new place renting a room with a mate. I don't think he'll come after either of us. I don't think he could blame us for what happened. I read so many stories after the fact. Everyone seems so prepared for what they'll do if they ever see the person again. I don't think I'd be any more prepared to face him this time than I was back then. I've had pretty intense nightmares ever since that day. And ever since I got that call that he might be released, when I close my eyes, I can hear that one sentence louder and clearer than I had ever heard it since he actually said it. They're never gonna find you two. A few years ago, I worked at a small local pet shop during college. I was one of 2 women who worked there, and we didn't generally work at nights together. This store kind of specializes in saltwater fish, and reptiles in particular. To have newbie reptile or aquarium people, or people just looking to learn some more, before actually getting a little companion. About a year into me working there, this one man came in and started asking questions about the bearded dragons in particular. I humored him for the first couple of minutes he came in, and answered his questions for an hour and a half to 2 hours each time he came in. But then he just kept coming in, not buying anything, not looking at any other animals. He refused to talk to any of my other coworkers standing right next to me. He was definitely a dude with a creepy vibe. But after about the third time this guy came in and questioned me about the bearded dragon's mating habits for about an hour, we all started getting uncomfortable. He knew my schedule because we were such a small store. I would call my friends and tell them to come hang out at the shop while he was there because he was just so persistent about talking to me and only about the bearded dragons with the occasional, "Do you have a boyfriend?" or a pickup line. I told him that I wasn't interested each time and told him I had a boyfriend, even though I didn't. At first, we were all pretty forgiving, chalking it up to social awkwardness, but it started to get scary when he would come in, look for me, not find me, but he'd find my car, which was significantly damaged and obviously my car back then, and he would just hang outside the shop. My bosses and managers started telling me to hide out in the back, employees only rat mouse room when he'd come in. My friends were weirded out. I was getting very uncomfortable around him, and my coworkers were actively trying to curb his enthusiasm for coming in, but I ended up just quitting the job. Around a month later, I'm watching the news with my dad, and oh buddy, were we in for a surprise. This same guy had been escorted off his ex's property in a local town by police, came back to the house the same night and murdered her. When she didn't show up for work, her coworkers called for a welfare check. Police got there. He answers the door and tells them that his name is Zeus. It most definitely was not his real name. He lets in the police, and they found her body in the bathtub in a tarp. They also found bloody plates, silverware, and pans in her sink. He had cooked and eaten parts of her heart, liver, and brain. He's still waiting for a trial in our state, and his interviews and clips of news people questioning him while the police were escorting him to the court are just bonkers. He tried to claim demonic possession at one point. He had previously murdered 2 people and been released from prison before moving to our area. Trust your instincts about people you interact with. People are wild. Let's definitely not meet. I was around the age of 13 and staying at a friend's house for New Year's Eve. She lived out on a farm, so there weren't many houses around where she lived. We were sitting on her bed and I happened to notice her dog running into the darkness outside. He was barking, but I thought he must have been barking at a fox or something. I didn't think anything of it until a few minutes later when I see him in my view again. He was growling, and then I saw what he was growling at. There was a woman trying to hit and kick him. I told my friend that there was someone outside, and she thought I was joking. My friend turned around and realized that there was actually a woman out there. She ran to her dad and told him about it. He ran to his room and came back with a shotgun. It's safe to say that my friend and I were scared, and he didn't even seem like the type of man to own a gun. Her mom heard the commotion, and they both went outside to the woman. Keep in mind that this is well past midnight in the country, so it's very scary to see a random woman outside attacking the dog. My friend's mom invited the woman inside because she seemed distressed. She offered her a glass of water and said that she would call the police. The woman was saying not to call the cops, and that her boyfriend was actually down the road, and they had gotten into an argument, and it had gotten physical, but she would be fine. Brian grabbed his car keys and said that he would be back, and he was going to see if the boyfriend was still there. The woman told him that she would come, but he said no. This is the scariest part. As he was driving down the road, he saw the car. And as he was driving up to it, his headlights lit up a bush, and there was a man standing there, trying to hide. Brian quickly turned around and drove back to the house. He told her that he was going to call the police and she needed to stay inside until they arrived. At this point, he thought she was a victim and felt sorry for the woman. She ended up just getting up and saying that she was fine and left, even though my friend's mom was trying to get her to stay and wait for the cops. They came out and took a statement. Then they told Brian that there has been a lot of car thieves lately in this manner. where someone would knock at night and get the homeowner to help. And when they would get near the car, the man would come out and rob them, stealing the car. The cops searched around the area for this couple, but they never found them. As 13-year-olds, this was such a scary experience, and just so unexpected. We still bring it up to each other now that we're in our 20s, just amazed that there are people out there with such malicious intent. My parents lived next door to a small red house. Our backyard faces the side of their house, which has a deck and 2 large windows. Around front, there are always at least 3 cars parked outside. Oddly enough, in the 10 years I lived here, I never saw anyone enter or leave. Once when I was 12, I saw a shadow thrown against the far wall that was visible through one of the windows. When my sister moved out, I took her room. A large, open converted space in the basement, which had a door and an outdoor stairwell, which led to the backyard. The door had a small window on it, which my sister covered with a Pulp Fiction poster. I redecorated and replaced the poster with some of those sheer half-curtain things. The way the room was set up, if I was laying in the bed or sitting on the couch, I was facing the door. When I first moved down there, I noticed that sometimes at night, I would hear the sound of leaves crunching in the stairwell. I chalked it up to my cat, who liked to roam the neighborhood. I had no reason to suspect otherwise, until a few weeks later. One night, when my parents were away on business, my boyfriend and I were sitting on the couch smoking. Suddenly, he got really stiff and was just staring at the window. I asked him what was wrong and he said, "I just saw a camera flash." I kind of just laughed it off and chalked it up to him being high. Who would want to take a picture of 2 people getting stoned? Still, the seeds of the paranoia had been sown, and it wasn't easy to get settled down for sleep that night. I kept looking at the gap between the curtains. There was no light at the bottom of the stairs, so if someone was really down there, I'd be none the wiser. At around 3, I heard the distinct sound of leaves under heavy boots. Definitely not a cat. I don't know what made me decide the best course of action was for me, standing all of 5'3", to confront the potential stalker myself. I didn't even put shoes on. I threw the door open. There was no one in the stairwell, so I ran up the stairs into the backyard. Standing there was a man in his mid-40s, maybe 6 feet tall, wearing one of those mechanic jumpsuits. He was holding a clunky, outdated digital camera. We stood there for a second just looking at each other. He seemed confused to see me. After what felt like an eternity, I remembered how to speak. "What the fuck are you doing?" My voice seemed to startle him, and he immediately turned. He ran through the backyard towards the red house and into the dark. After that, I didn't see any strange flashes of light or hear any crunching of leaf noises. It really freaks me out to think how many nights he could have been standing out there in the dark, watching me. So I'm reading these posts and decide maybe I should post what happened to my friend and I in high school. I was in 10th grade and we had a 4-day weekend in the winter. Her cousin was older, in her 20s, and had a small house about 2 hours away in the country. She said we could spend the weekend with her. It was pretty rural, very beautiful and quiet. One gas station that had Krispy Kremes delivered daily. We go up there to get our donuts and come home. A very short drive, maybe 2 minutes. We had a good time, watching movies and such, and went to bed around 1 a.m. The bedroom we stayed at had 2 windows with those cheap plastic blinds, and one had a bed beneath it. We lie down, and my friend falls asleep very fast, leaving me to a quiet house. As I'm drifting off, I hear a very soft, almost imperceptible, slight dragging sounds, followed by a small crunch. The noises got louder, and suddenly, a shadow slides over us. The moon was bright, and the ground was covered in snow. It was like someone was standing outside the window with the moonlight shining behind them. My heart was pounding and racing and feels like it's about to burst, and I hold my breath for longer than I thought was possible. The noises started and the shadow walked away. I could not sleep and lied curled up in the middle of the bedroom, terrified until daylight hit, when I finally got the guts to move from my position and get her cousin. After I told her what happened, we went outside and there were footsteps leading up to the window and then back away again. We were so terrified, 3 females out there alone. We packed up so fast and got out of there in under 10 minutes. To this day, I can't sleep under a window. I still love Krispy Kreme though. I was 21 years old at the time, and I was having one hell of a summer. I had taken a break from my college courses and started working a full-time and a part-time job. I worked part-time at a grocery store, which is where I met a lot of people, and got to even go to some parties with some of these people. I was the type of person that if you put a drink in my hand, then I was going to be smiling and having a great time. I never wanted to cause trouble with anybody. It was about mid-July, and I had just gotten off work at the grocery store. I called my buddy up that worked at the store with me to see if he wanted to grab a drink or two. He said that he was going to go to someone's house party instead of a bar that night, so I decided to meet him there. I went home, changed clothes, and proceeded to drive out to the party. It was about 10:30 p.m., and I had to drive out to this swampy-looking area surrounded by trailers and a dirt road for several miles. I remember turning onto this road where the house was located, and I saw about a quarter of a mile ahead of me a pickup truck with its emergency flashers on. I took a quick look at it and thought maybe it was my friend's truck because it looked familiar. I drove up to the truck and saw a guy sitting in the driver's seat with a girl in the passenger seat. I told him that I had mistaken them for someone else and asked if they were okay. The man looked like he was already boozed up and looked at me with a drunken smile, stating, "No man, I'm fine. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on myself." Once I checked to be sure that they were okay, I went about my business and drove to the party. It was the last time I spoke to that person. I arrived to the party shortly thereafter, and looking back at it now, I wish I had never got out of my truck and set foot on that property. There were people standing around chatting in the front yard, while another guy kept yelling back at someone in the trailer. I guess an altercation or disagreement had taken place before I got there, because all I kept hearing was someone saying, "I'm gonna fuck that motherfucker up if he sets a foot around here again." I did my best to ignore all of it, and went inside to play beer pong with some people I knew. I wasn't looking for any trouble that night. I just wanted to drink beer and chill. As I sat on the couch, enjoying my cold one and bullshitting with some of the guys, I saw this heavy-set guy storm back into the house and walk down the hallway. When he came back, he had what appeared to look like a rifle and a shotgun in his hand. He came back in, and for some reason, I introduced myself to him. He stared me down for a while, puffing on a cigarette. My hand extended out to him, and he didn't shake my hand. Instead, he pulled out his pocket knife and flicked it open and said, "Name is Billy, and you best be on my good side, 'cause I ain't no one to fuck with." I remember after he walked away, I hurried up, finished drinking my beer, and drove back home. Something about that night was a little unsettling to me. I don't know what it was, but something didn't seem right. A few days passed, and I was on my way to work. I had to stop to fuel up, so I stopped at a convenience store and went inside to pay for gas. When I went in, I saw the newspaper rack over by the counter, and when I went to go look at it, one article was titled, "Man Found Dead Near the River." The article title wasn't what gave me chills. It was a picture underneath the title. It was a man I saw parked outside the road that night when I was heading to the party. People believed that someone had murdered him, and to this day, I don't believe the case was ever solved. I think back on that night sometimes, wondering if I was just at the wrong place at the wrong time, but I also think someone at that party had to have some involvement with the killing of that man. Sometimes I wonder if Billy was the man who murdered the guy, but I don't know. What I do know is, after that incident, I was very careful about who I hung out with on the weekends. This just happened 2 nights ago. I'm not over it. I was working in my bedroom, which is where my desktop is set up. It was about 12:45 when I decided to wind down for the night. My husband had gone to bed around 9 p.m., but offered to take the guest room so I didn't have to stop working. He's awesome. Typically, when this happens, my husband takes the dog with him. So imagine my surprise when I turned off the lights and saw my pup crawl out from the other side of the bed, give a big stretch, and come up to me. It was now 1 a.m. on the dot. I turned on the patio light to let the dog out to go potty. She is older and tends to wake us up in the middle of the night to go. I thought I would prevent that from happening. I watched through the blinds as my dog stared out and began to wag her tail profusely. She crept just out of view, her eyes very focused. I got a gross sense of dread and began to panic. I threw the door open and called for her. That's when I heard him. I don't know what he said. I was too petrified to listen, really. She didn't come at first, just kind of looked at me and then back at the person on my porch, who I couldn't see. I noticed then that there were pillows and a blanket stacked on top of my grill that for sure weren't mine. I screamed my dog's name and she came back in. I ran to the other side of the house and woke my husband up, shouting that there was someone on our porch. He got up in disbelief and wandered to our patio entrance from the kitchen and opened the door. There, a young man in his 20s or so sat on the ground against our house. He was barefoot and on the same wall that the bedroom entrance to the patio is on, which is why I couldn't see him unless I had stepped out. My husband asked if he was alright, but couldn't hear his response. My husband told him that he was at the wrong house and that he needed to leave. We went to our safe and grabbed our gun, trying to talk through the insanity and our nerves. We didn't live in a crime-heavy city, and we've never heard about anything happening in our neighborhood. Nothing like this had ever happened to us before. There we were, 1 a.m., with a stranger on our patio who had been there for God only knows how long, in the dark. We walked back out to the living room and saw that he had moved to a chair on our patio. My husband shined the light on the handgun at him and shouted for him to leave, and I called the police. When they arrived, the man was gone, but his pillows, blankets were still out there. One of the officers told us that he believed he knew who the young man was. He had a psychotic episode earlier in the week after coming off his bipolar meds. He lived nearby and was probably headed back that way. We're no strangers to mental illness, so naturally I felt awful that we had leapt to calling the police and brandishing a weapon, but at the same time, what the fuck are you doing in my yard? When I was in 3rd grade, there's this girl in my class. She wasn't particularly liked by anyone, and she was quite the bully, an overall rude person, even to adults. She was known to have anger issues and get mad at people for what seemed like no reason. I was no exception. Her name was Carly. She had been mean to me in the past, but that didn't deter me from going to her house one day, after she had been nice to me all day at school. Naive, I know. So before leaving school that day, I called my mom to ask her if I was allowed to go to Carly's house. She said yes, and to call her when I got there, so I could give her the address. Now when I think back, I wonder if she had a bad feeling about the situation, since she didn't normally ask for the address, and she isn't picking me up since Carly's house was only about 2 blocks away. When I get there, after calling my mom of course, Carly insisted on making me look pretty, aka wetting my hair and brushing it. I let her. Then she told me to close my eyes and that she was going to take me into the living room. I closed my eyes and she began to guide me towards the bathtub. We were already in the bathroom, so the tub was a solid 2 feet away from where I was standing. I opened my eyes just enough to see where she was guiding me. My foot hit the side of the tub, and I said that this doesn't feel like the living room. She said it was, and that I just needed to step over the gate. I tell her that I know that this is a bathtub. She stops trying to get me into the tub and brings me to the kitchen instead. She says she's going to make cereal. I was standing behind her when she reached into the dishwasher and said she was grabbing a spoon. The way she clarified that she was grabbing a spoon immediately told me what she was going to grab, and it was for sure not a spoon. I can still remember the feeling of dread that overcame me when she said those words. She pulls out a large knife and backs me into the corner, holding the knife only 2 inches away from my neck. I can't remember if any words were exchanged during this. Maybe I was too shocked to say anything. I only stayed there for maybe 30 seconds before I pushed her aside and ran towards the door. I grabbed my backpack and put on my winter boots. By the time I had my boots on, Carly was trying to block the sliding door. I pushed past her and flung the door open. I ran down her patio steps and out the front gate, not bothering to close it. I just wanted to get home where I was safe. I remember her yelling at me as her dog escaped through the open gate. I didn't care. One of her neighbors who was in their front lawn waved and smiled at me, clearly oblivious to what had just gone down. I ran down the road and to my house, not stopping once. It wasn't until I was in the door of my house that I broke down. I began to cry and yell for my mom. My 2 older sisters yelled at me to shut up. My mom walked over to me and immediately knew something was wrong. I explained to her what happened, and she was very understanding and freaked out. I can't remember if this was the same day or the next day that I had to talk to a police officer about what happened. He asked me what kind of knife it was and whatnot. I think my mom relayed most of the story to him because I don't remember having to say much. They got in contact with Carly's foster mom, and Carly got in big shit for it. At school, Carly yelled at me for getting the cops involved and tried to guilt trip me by saying her mom threatened to put her back in foster care if she did anything like that again. I told her I didn't care. The school was also notified about the situation, and the teachers made sure to keep an extra eye on her, but that didn't mean I wasn't paranoid around her. I made sure to keep my guard up for the rest of the school year. I always thought it was a bit extreme to involve the cops, but it ended up making Carly never mess with me again. I ended up moving after that year for unrelated reasons, only to move back before I started 6th grade. The first day of middle school, I was waiting for them to call my name, so I know which class is my homeroom, when I hear an all too familiar name, Carly. I watch as no one goes up to join the class. Was she not here? Next I was called. I go up to join the class that she would have been in. I found out later when the teacher was doing attendance that she had moved 3 hours away just before the beginning of the school year. It's been 3 years since then, and I can only hope she doesn't come back. But if she does, I'm not too concerned. I will make sure she stays the hell away from me. That incident gave me some trust issues, but at least now I know to choose my friends wisely. I was vacuuming my house at 9:30 p.m. with my music playing when I get a knock at my door. My boyfriend was at work and I wasn't expecting company, especially so late at night. I turned the music down and realized the door was not locked. Instantly, I'm terrified. I'm only 4'10", so I had to prop myself up the wall to look through the peephole and carefully lock the door. More pounding. The man outside my door is no one I recognize and looks disgruntled, dirty, and quite frightening. He was short and stocky and looked angry. He grew frustrated, knowing I just turned down my music. He heard me lock the door and started calling out, "Ma'am." More knocking. "Excuse me, ma'am. How the fuck did he know I was a woman?" I look around the room and I see that my blinds are open, and I realize he must have been watching me vacuum. Thankfully, my neighbors right across from me opened their doors, and the husband asked, "Who are you, and what are you doing?" Startled, the creep fumbles and says, "Oh, good evening, sir. I was just going to offer my carpet cleaning services to her." The husband goes, "That's great. She doesn't want it. You need to leave, right now." Creep left promptly. Afterwards, I called the police, my boyfriend, and I closed my blinds and texted the neighbors to thank them for scaring him away. I paid extra to live on the top floor, but it seems this creep was watching me from below. So this happened last night. At 2 a.m. I hear my door open, and it was a really dark room, so I thought it was just my roommate. Well, the person walks straight to my laundry basket and starts shuffling through it, as if looking for something. I sit up and say, "Hey, is everything okay?" No response. The person then proceeds to walk back out of my room and close the door behind them. I get up and open my door to see my roommate's boyfriend staring at himself in the bathroom mirror. I again ask if he's alright, and no response. I just closed and locked my door and got back in bed. This morning I told my roommate what happened. Her boyfriend had left for the day, and she said that she found my towel and bra in her room this morning. Basically, he was sleepwalking, but it creeped me the fuck out. This was 5 or 6 years ago. After meeting with a couple of my friends who were stationed at a nearby bar, my friend Robin and I decided to end girls' night early, at 1 a.m. I'm horrible with street names, so bear with me. We went to Rocket Bar, so you can know that it was near there. We got into the car and started pulling out. We were driving a bit slow because we weren't familiar with this area, so we didn't want to miss any turns. I had my window rolled down because when I drink, I get a bit flushed. The street that we were on was a bit dead at the time. We heard a yell and some loud ass crying. It was clearly a lady's voice, so we slowed down to see what was going on. Robin was driving and I was in the passenger seat. On our right side we saw a lady stumble out of the street, holding her chest and crying. Robin locked the doors and cautiously rolled her window up, leaving it only an inch open. Thank God. The lady came right up to the window and said, "I need help." I asked, "What's wrong, honey?" She kept repeating, "I need help," over and over again. Me being a naive idiot, I put my hand on the door like I'm about to open it, only to be grabbed by Robin whispering, "Don't fucking open the door." The lady, who had been mumbling "I need help" repeatedly, like she was slurring, saw Robin stop me, and her eyes opened wide as hell, and she started yelling, "I need help!" We jumped at that, and said, "How can we help?" She shoved her fingers in the cracked part of the window and screamed, "Let me in!" We started yelling, "Stop that!" and she started yanking at the door handle. Robin said, "Oh hell no," and we started pulling away. I shit you not, the next 30 seconds was fucking terrifying. The lady yelled to someone, "They're leaving!" and we saw two guys run out from a car parked a few cars behind us, on the right. Robin sped away, like a scene from an action movie. We looked in our rearview mirror and saw that the three of them were standing in the street. Ladies and gentlemen, please be careful. I can't imagine what would have happened to my dumbass if it weren't for my friend. I know it's in some of us to want to help, but there's a lot of evil people out there who disguise themselves to be in harm. Be aware of your surroundings and always lock your doors. I lived in a small town in Denmark, with a population of roughly 3,000 people, where nothing ever really happens, and the following scared the entire town to death. Back in 2005 or so, when I was still in kindergarten, a strange and agitated man, who was a father to one of the children, came and demanded to my teacher that he wanted to see his daughter and take her out of school. My teacher could see in his eyes that something was not right, and that he was extremely upset. My teacher therefore denied him to see his daughter, and after a very uncomfortable discussion, The father eventually gave up, walked to his car without looking back, and drove home. My teacher grew very worried and decided to call the local police to go check the family house. Later that day it came on the news that the father had murdered his own wife with a gun and afterwards shot himself in the head. At the time, my best friend lived next door to the family, and he has since told me that he could hear the mother screaming in a very horrifying way, followed by 3 gunshots, and then a grown man crying his heart out, 10 seconds of silence, and finally one more gunshot. It creeps me out just to think about this, and I feel so sorry for the daughter, who was left an orphan at such an early stage in life. I really don't know what would have happened to the daughter if my teacher had not stopped the man from taking her home with him. I hope you're having a decent life wherever you are, girl. I'm just gonna get right into this. I am now 27, and this happened when I was about 11. I lived in a pretty large city, right next to City Park, and in not such a great part of town. Lots of homeless people drinking in the park after dark, and lots of drugs and gang members were everywhere. But as a kid I didn't know better. However, my mother should have. She let me go out after dark. I would walk around town all the time. Plus I had a habit that every day I would walk about 4 or 5 blocks to the gas station called the CGS to get a big fountain drink. While my friend had came home with me on the bus that day, it was a public bus. So we get out, run inside and ask my mom for a few dollars for some soda, and she obliged. We spent the walk down to the gas station listening to music on a crappy CD player and goofing off. On the way, we noticed a group of homeless men sitting in a gazebo near the sidewalk that we were headed up. They were drinking at the time and looking at us strangely, so naturally it gave us the creeps. We crossed the street and didn't think any more of it. We got our delicious fizzy drinks, made some jokes about the sign that said, "No shirts, no shoes, no service," and headed home. On the way back, we stayed on the sidewalk that didn't have the gazebo. We were about 3 blocks from our home when my friend poked me and said, "Hey, that guy's following us." And that's when my ears picked up a distinct sound of footsteps behind us. I remember watching something that said, if someone's following you, to cross the street. So we sped up a little bit and crossed the road. He sped up and followed us. We were on hiding alert now, so we sped up again. We were pretty much speed walking at this point, and we crossed again. Halfway through the road, we heard him yell, "Hey, hold up." We didn't listen, we just kept going, and of course he followed us. And at this point, we started to flat out run. We ran maybe a block back to my house, and he stopped following us right across the street, where he promptly veered off to the right. We were so freaking scared, to the point that we were hysterically laughing and crying in the middle of the courtyard. I think I hyperventilated or something, because I had dropped my giant 64-ounce soda and spilled it everywhere, then promptly threw up into the puddle. Directly after, I had a few minutes to calm down, and I had this jolt of memory as to who the guy was. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I celebrated my 11th birthday, and my family had thrown a big party where they invited a couple of homeless guys to hang out and eat some barbecue with us. This was one of the men who had been invited, and his name was Sticks. We laughed the ordeal off and thought we were dumb for overreacting because, duh, we knew him. However, sometimes I think about this, and all I can wonder is why this man tried to start a conversation with a kid you don't know except from a small birthday bash. He never even talked to me at the party. All I know is I'm glad we didn't stop and talk to him at the park. To the creepy guy chasing 2 11-year-olds, let's not meet again. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and me and my childhood friend Joe were outside all the time. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning and we would stay in the woods all weekend. We only came out for school. We loved pretending that we were frontiersmen. We built shelters, traps, practiced making fire with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to be in high school, we got the notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based on the movie with the same name that had just came out. The idea was that we would walk on the railroad tracks out in the country. Instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find cool bridges to fish from, and a camp a little ways off the tracks. Of course, we knew it was dangerous and that we would likely be trespassing, but we were kids. We had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers, discovered bridges that no one went to. We fished. We hid from a lot of trains. At night, we camped in the woods just near the tracks and made small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. In fact, it was so fun that we did it multiple times. Never had a problem. After high school, me and Joe went our separate ways. We both left home, but always stayed in touch, and always tried to coordinate visits so we see each other occasionally. One summer in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both in town for about a week. We'd do stuff with the family in the day, and at night, we'd either catch drinks at a bar or sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, Joe and I got to talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and a beer are a hell of a mix, so we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp for one night, and walk home. The day came and we started out early in the morning. We had my wife drop us off at the old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested instead of walking our usual route, we'd take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, and we had a map, so I gave it a, what the hell, and we set off. The day went fine. It was fun, and a little sad, but in a good way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint, and moved on. We had no fishing gear, but we had brought some canned food and other stuff. Before the night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forested area, trees on every side of the train tracks, so it felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now, this is what we used to do in the old days. We walk around the area for a little bit to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over the hill and we were actually camping in their yard. We walked around maybe 100 feet or so in the woods, up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything from the top of the short hill, we'd be fine. But when we get to the top, we see an old building down at the bottom, about 100 yards into the woods. It was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed that it was a sugar shack or something, because there didn't appear to have a clear road into it. From where we were, there didn't look to be anyone in it either. All was quiet, no movement could be seen, no lights. We decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building we saw that it wasn't a sugar shack, it was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a sagging building whose wooden planks were almost black from the years of moss and rot. A cross still stood up at the top of the place, also weathered black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just an open doorway. We got close enough to see inside. There was rows of pews and a build-up section in front for the preacher to stand. We didn't go in all the way. We didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up the hill to our spot we had picked to camp. Having the hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up to being the natural creepiness of seeing a church in the middle of the woods. Besides, at this point, it was dusk and we just decided to rig up our hammocks and go to sleep and move on at early morning. Night set in, and as we laid in the hammocks and shot the shit, we began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversations went a little like this. Did you hear that? What the fuck was that? It's like people singing. And it did just sound like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill to see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly through the woods from the old days. It was second nature to us. The moon was barely out, but it provided enough light so you wouldn't walk right into a tree. But it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top of the hill, we saw a light in the distance. It was coming from the church, and the singing was coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads close together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this shit?" The light looked to be candlelight from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either. We had about a football field length between us and aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared the shit out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you see in the movies. But again, it was like he was speaking in a different language because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually it got to where a single male voice would say something and a bunch of voices would answer in song. This lasted for a while, and then they all broke into this long, sustained wail that kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I had to cover my ears. Then it stopped. At this point, I was just ready to say, "Let's get the fuck out of here," when Joe put his hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't really make them out well, but what we could see was a line of figures walk out the doorway, all holding hands in single file. We could see some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and then the light from the flashlights began to move towards us and the hill. We booked it back to our campsite, grabbed our shit and ran back to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the direction we had came from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw the lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing lights and came to a road. By our map, we knew a small town was about 15 minutes down it, and we could walk there. We got to a 24-hour gas station, and I called my wife to get us. My wife and other friends all thought it was just kids messing with us, but I heard those voices, and they sure as hell didn't sound like any kids to me. Not sure who those people were, but it was definitely the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me out in the woods. Okay, so I'm 14 and I'm most often mistaken for an 18-year-old because of my shape. For a little context, I was at the YMCA with my sister. We were swimming for a while, and then I started to feel sick. My younger sister said, "You don't look good. Maybe you should go sit in the changing room for a while." "Yeah, I think I will." I went to the changing room for some peace and quiet, and luckily for me, no one was in there. I sat on one of the benches and closed my eyes. A few moments later, I could hear someone come in. It was a guy, tall, muscular, and generally good looking. I brushed it off thinking he was probably waiting for his girlfriend and came in to check because she was taking too long or something. That was until he approached me and sat right next to me, so close that our thighs were touching. I was really surprised and scooted over and gave him that "what do you think you're doing" look. He smiled at me and said, "Don't worry, girl, I'm not gonna hurt you," and proceeded to put his hand on my back. I stood up and backed away. I was too scared to run because he seemed athletic, so he probably would have caught me. He asked me, "How old are you, baby?" in a sickening sweet tone. I say 14, and he nonchalantly says, "Cool." So I asked how old he was. 23. He stood up and started walking over to me, and I backed up away from him. This is the turning point. I hear a bathroom stall open, and there standing in all her glory was a lady who I call my hero. She stepped out, and I knew she heard everything. The dude hightailed it out of there. The lady was nice and stayed with me for a while. Her name was Stacy. Thank you, Stacy. Back in 2018, I had a bad fever. The kind of fever that will make you wake up in the middle of the night, freezing your ass off, and the next thing you're sweating. Anyways, fast forward. My room is closest to the front door. It was 3 a.m. and I was still awake because I couldn't sleep. All of a sudden I hear someone semi-aggressively trying to open the front door. I live with my parents, so I thought it was my brother coming home, so I called out his name. The doorknob continued turning, and I hid in my bed terrified. A few minutes later, I told my dad, and he could see the door had been mangled with. That day he installed cameras, and no lie, about a month later we caught a man on camera trying to open the basement door this time. I really regret not looking out my window to try to spot the man, but I was terrified. It also freaks me out that if that night someone had left the door unlocked, a stranger would have been lurking in my house, with my door being the first one. So a little background here. My father was in the army for 21 years. He retired and moved to a very small town in Central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though he didn't need the money, between his retirement and what my mom was making as a bookkeeper, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and it being a small town, the owners wouldn't care if I came there and helped him out with stocking the coolers or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or smokes. This all took place back in the late 80s and early 90s. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990, and I remember that date well because it was shortly after my birthday, and being 15 in Florida, I had just gotten my learner's permit. My dad would let me drive him to and from work just to get some experience on the road, both at day and night. I was sitting at my usual spot at the table that was set up alongside the window, book in hand, feet propped up, and a Mountain Dew on the table, along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evenings like that, reading books, getting up to run the register, or stock the coolers at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual, and I realized that a lady was walking up to our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. This in itself was really strange because of where we were located. You didn't see much people walking, and definitely not walking from the direction of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere and was coming to use the phone to call for a tow truck or something. I was completely wrong. She came inside the store, looked around for a few minutes. I remember getting a strange and creepy feeling about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride to the next town up north. My dad let her know that he was working and there was no way he could take her. She turns and looks at me, and while she's looking away from him, my dad catches my eye and suddenly shakes his head no. I was confused for a second, but then she turns her back to my dad and points at me, asking if I could take her. My dad responded back that I only had my learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back. Normally I would have done it, even though it was illegal, but I'd done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with customers. For whatever reason, he was dismissive of her. Turns out, he had a bad vibe about her from the minute he saw her walking up the drive. Well, she cusses him out for a minute, and he basically tells her to get out of the store. She slammed the door so hard that it opened back up, and I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she slammed it. Then she just stalks out of the store and down the driveway. I keep an eye on her and continue to watch as she makes her way back to the interstate and then starts up the northbound ramp. Almost a year passes and I'm in my bedroom. Less than a week before my 16th birthday, I hear my dad yelling from his room. "Son, get your ass in here. Look at this." I quickly run to the living room to see my dad pointing at the TV. On the TV was a mugshot of the lady, and I immediately remembered her as the lady from the store. Turns out I almost gave a ride to Eileen Wuornos, the real lady from Monster, the movie. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside of the suburbs. It seemed like it had the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel so isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my house feel even more quaint on the dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so I'm pulling up into my house. I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of the car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. This was weird because I had never smelled cigarettes around my house before. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I just ignored it and went inside. I had just come off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I had heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I had even given him a spare key so that he could stop by even when I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from the phone screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before the phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9 something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There was a couple of seconds of silence before I heard a loud footfall as someone started to run through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran into the closet. They were already upstairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. The house had 3 rooms, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started lifting myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back into the hallway and into another room, which just had some boxes in the corner, some weights, and a table where I painted miniature models. I guess they decided if someone was hiding, it would be the bedroom because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, I hear the closet door ripped open. I was just crouching in the attic, just a foot away or so from the access, so that I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from the room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. The scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clattering of items as things were thrown around and my furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet and wasn't certain if I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was that the intruder had flipped over my bed. I assume an attempt to find me. That was a loud noise I heard as he stepped away from the closet before he screamed. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa was flipped, all books and pictures and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. All the cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and the boxes of canned foods had been thrown on the ground. As far as I could tell though, the only thing I was missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along the fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often use to smoke meth. So they think that he was watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected the evidence and told me that I should stay with my family or friends for the night and get the door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved the shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning up things. I would often go to the window with a flashlight to shine along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I never saw anything. The next day I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and the side of my house. I ran a phone cable up to the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to get stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else ever happened in the house though. I lived there another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of bed and going to the closet and climbing into the attic as quickly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go into a crawl space. I try not to think about what would have happened if I was a bit slower to getting into the attic, or if he hadn't gone to the bathroom at the end of the hall first. I was watching my daughter's kids while she and her husband went out of town. They have a teenage daughter. Let's name her Alyssa. At like 3 a.m. I'm waking up by a weird rustling sound and look out my window to see some movement. I saw a boy emerge from the bushes on the side of the house. I saw a bike tossed on the lawn that definitely wasn't ours. My first thought was it was a burglar casing the house. But since he looked young and came through on a bike, I figured scaring him straight would be enough for him to decide to head home. I didn't want to ruin a teenager's life by calling the cops straight away. I went on the porch, flipping the lights on. "Can I help you?" The guy looked surprised, but not nervous. He was wearing a Letterman-style jacket, but once I got a clear view of him from the streetlight, he seemed much older than my granddaughter, looked gruff, and more wiry than athletic. He walked up closer to the house and said, "Yeah, I'm looking for Alyssa." I gave him a disapproving glare, hoping that he'd realized he'd come looking for a girl late at night, and a grumpy old person answered that it would be time to split. I'm thinking what must have happened is, Alyssa knew her parents were going to go out of town, and maybe before she knew I'd be staying over, she told her secret older boyfriend to come over. It was late, and I was alone with several kids, so I didn't want him coming any closer to the house. I also thought it was weird that he came so late and wanted to be sure Alyssa actually wanted to talk to him. So I said, "I'm sorry, who?" And he said, "Alyssa. You know, Alyssa Johnson. This is her house." I thought he knew her full name. They must at least be friends. I said, "You wait here." He started walking up, and I felt a sick burning in my gut. Instinct kicked in. I yelled, "No, stop, freeze," then readjusted and said, "You stay right there. This is private property. Don't take a step closer. Wait there." So I go in, and Alyssa is asleep, just one room over from where the rustling first occurred, and I wake her up and say something to the effect of, "I don't know whose big idea it was to have friends over at this time, but you gotta tell them to go home." She had no clue what I was talking about. I told her, "There's a guy outside asking for you." Confused, she gets up and goes to the window. She sees him and goes white as a sheet. He asked for me? Yeah. By name? Yes. Call the police. I've never seen him in my life. I called 911 immediately. But as I was on the phone with them, Alyssa started tugging on my arm. He's coming up. I had younger kids in the house to think about, so I kept the door latched and pulled it open just enough so I could yell. I asked my husband, and nobody knows Alyssa Johnson, leave my property or I'm calling 911. He got angry and started yelling for her to come out. Thankfully, the police came pretty quickly, and while he heard sirens, he grabbed his bike and rode off. I watched where he was going, and he jumped into the passenger side of a car without headlights on or front plates and sped off. The police followed in the same direction once I told them, but they didn't get him. They advised us to take all of her social media details offline if she was sure she didn't know the person, and said that there was a couple similar reports recently and they were looking into it. I got a heavy lock on my door and she slept in my room for the remainder of my visit. So this is one of my experiences from working as an overnight security guard at my local port. This did not happen to me firsthand. It happened to one of my coworkers. But since that incident happened during my shift, I would fear to even go into the restroom alone. So just a recap on setting. The local port has a radius of nearly 2 miles, and there are 3 overnight security guards on the shift, including me. We're all at the front gate post, and it's about the size of a trailer home. The front gate post is separated from everything else in the site. Buildings, slabs, offices, the oil rigs, everything. It's the entry point to the entire industrial park. The offices and restrooms are about walking distance from our post. And it's really dark since there wasn't any lights around. Around 2 a.m., the lieutenant walks out of the post to go use the restroom. The restrooms are deep in the center of the offices, and the offices carry a very creepy vibe because they were constructed around the 1950s. About 7 minutes later, me and Mike look out the post window to find our lieutenant sprinting back to our post. At first we thought it was hilarious since he's a chubby dude, so we found it funny to watch him run. Then the realization started kicking in. The lieutenant was the only one who let out the fact that the site was haunted. He said he had seen things, and that it didn't really startle him much anymore. We slowly began to imagine and wondering what the fuck he had seen or heard to scare the shit out of him like this. I mean, it must have been bad enough for him to be running back in a very hysterical manner. The lieutenant opens the door to the post that me and Mike are in. We are both speechless and just staring at him as he catches his breath. After catching his breath, he tells us, "This is the last time I will ever use those restrooms in the office building. I was taking a shit in the 3rd stall, and then I heard the restroom door swivel open. I thought it was one of you, so I simply ignored it. But the thing is, I didn't hear any footsteps. I was listening to music, but I paused it to see if I could hear anything. A few seconds went by, and nothing. And then I heard the water faucet go off by itself, and then, a few seconds later, the air dryer went off as well. I finished my business, and I ran back as fast as I could because I knew it wasn't either you in there. Creepiest part about this is that both the water faucet and hair dryer both were motion activated, so in order for them to go off, something had to trigger it. Before this incident, I was already skeptical about using the restroom alone. I hated taking shits at work during the night shift because I was always anticipating for something creepy like this to happen to me. The worst part is when you're taking a shit, you're in a vulnerable position. Also, those restrooms are way too deep in the building and it's pitch black inside. You need a flashlight to go inside and it's very quiet and creepy. This is another event that happened and it's probably the creepiest one. The veteran guards that had been there for years would often say that the site was very haunted, given the fact that there had been accidents and deaths that occurred there a long time ago. I was aware that people die due to freak accidents, and I do believe in angels and demons since I'm a religious person, but I just always thought the superiors were just messing with the new guys. I would work 5 or 6 nights a week, and for the first few weeks, I never really saw or heard anything out of the ordinary, except for maybe a few questionable creaks, and would see a few misplaced objects while doing my patrols. Nothing too crazy. Just to describe the settings to you, this is a fairly big site, and on occasions, when there are big projects being constructed at the port, the workers sometimes stay overnight. Due to the fact that there were times where the port workers were required to stay there for a few days, there was a gym in the site for their convenience. The gym was fairly old. It had a sauna, weights, a racquetball court. Usually on our patrol rounds, me and one of the other guards, Mike, would stop by the gym and play a few rounds of racquetball before returning back to the front gate. On one of those nights, Mike and I decided to hit a full workout instead of playing racquetball in the cage. It's around 2 a.m. The entire building is so quiet that you could hear the electricity running through the lights. The air conditioner is cut off, and so is everything else. The only thing running are the lights. 15 to 20 minutes into the workout, we hear a loud thump. We brush it off as nothing and continue our workout. Then after a few minutes, we heard a loud thump once more. At first we thought it was just our lieutenant, which could have been walking around, but then we radioed him and he gave us his location, which was the front gate. We tried thinking logically on what could be making those thumping sounds on the wall. They were coming from the court on the other side. We thought that it was an air conditioning unit, but then remembered it was off. And even when it switched on during the day, there has never been a report of thumping coming from the air conditioning unit. After a few minutes, the thumps started occurring one right after another. We were very creeped out at this point, but what we were about to witness still scares the absolute shit out of me till this day. We started to approach the other side of the gym, where the glass door was. We turned on the flashlights and aimed it towards the clear glass door. And I got chills all over my body, and started to tear up, so much out of fear that I was about to cry. We saw one of the balls rolling slowly by itself inside the court, but there was no one in there. So that means that the loud thumps were the ball mysteriously being tossed against the wall, as if someone or something was playing in the cage. We were both confused and frightened to how this could be really happening. We couldn't make sense of any of it. We were scared shitless and started yelling and running, because we knew that there was probably something evil toying with us right there. As we sprinted full speed back to the front gate, the lieutenant saw us and asked us why we were crying and running in a ridiculous manner. We told him what we had witnessed, and his facial expression scared us even more. He then said, "That's why guards quit so often. There's something evil in the area, and this is not the first time something bad like this has happened here." He then showed us security footage of dark figures and shadows literally passing through the office areas, and lights mysteriously switching on and off. Till this day, I still get chills recounting my experiences with my friends and family, and I'm even getting chills right now typing this. I had never had a real encounter with the supernatural until that night. Many say that it was a demonic presence messing around. Others say it was just a ghost of a dead person who died in the area. I don't know what it was, but I didn't last long at that job after that. It was around 12:30 a.m. when I go outside to throw away the garbage, and the first thing I see is a woman in her 20s facing the corner of the wall of the house, as if she was being punished. And the only thing I see is her long black hair that is reaching her lower back. She was wearing a short black leather skirt and sleeveless blouse. It was quite cold outside, so I was wondering if she was alright. She wasn't crying. She was not sad. She was not waiting for anyone. She was just quiet. "Hey, can I help you?" No response. "Are you waiting for someone?" Again, no response. "Are you okay?" She didn't budge or make a single noise. I wanted to tap on her shoulder to get to the bottom of this, but I decided to do that after I threw away the garbage. In an unlikely case where she decides to attack me and I happen to have 2 full garbage bags. I walked around the corner and when I came back, she was gone. My porch was clear. She obviously did not pass me, so she must have went in the other way, and to be honest with you, I was glad she was gone. I go inside the house, lay on my bed, and it's really late at night, and I remember one very important thing. The street was empty on the other side and no one was there, which means there was only one place the woman could have gone into. My home. I immediately grabbed the hunting knife I received as a gift for my 18th birthday and head out to search for the stranger in my home. I'll walk around silently, checking each room, under every table, inside every closet, and even in the basement. As I'm walking upstairs, I hear quick heavy footsteps running. I rush to the scene, trying to catch up to this person to confront her. I check my surroundings, and everything seemed okay. I found the front door open with the wind rustling through the gap. I go outside, and I see the woman in the distance running away, fading into the darkness. She never came back, and I never saw her again. Thankfully, nothing was stolen, and more importantly, no one was hurt. Reading some of the stories on here reminded me of something that happened during my holidays this past Christmas. I went on a family holiday with my mom, dad, and brother to Tasmania, which is kind of like a big island to the south of Australia. I wasn't terribly interested in the trip, just wanted to spend some time with the family, so I left all the booking to my dad. And I'll never do that again. He has his own Airbnb he manages, so I thought he would be able to find a decent place on his own. When we walked up to the Airbnb my dad had booked, the first thought I had was, if I wanted to sell drugs, I would do it here. My mom wasn't impressed at all, and was already telling my dad off for booking it. I didn't say anything. Maybe the inside is nicer. It was a dingy little house. The paint was peeling, roof was rusty, and there were plants overgrown to the side of the building. There were 3 entrances. The first one was the entrance for the host. It looked okay, not as bad as our entrance, a little tidier. It went downstairs, so after a while we figured out that the host most likely lived below us. The second entrance looked like it was the main entrance to the house, but it was sealed shut. The door looked like it would break down if anyone was even to push on it lightly, and it was obviously unused. The third entrance was ours, and besides the overgrown plants, it was fairly normal. We figured out later that it looks like the host had divided up the house somehow. She lives below, we live upstairs, but there was another half of the house upstairs that wasn't accounted for. Hard to explain, but the space we occupied only accounted for half of the house and only went up to the main entrance I spoke of, which was in the middle of the house. We checked in, basically just grabbed the keys. The host has never contacted us up to this point. All was well on the inside. It looked a little old, but wasn't creepy from the get-go. I did notice some odd things, and I only mentioned this to my dad. There were a bunch of antique instruments displayed on the entrance, and right on top of one of the pianos were 3 things that looked like urns. Now to explain, I am of Chinese descent, and those urns freak the fuck out of me. Some people think that they are for displaying, but we use them to store dead people's ashes, so I really didn't like them being there. I told my dad, and he didn't like it either. He went to tap on the urn to see if something was actually in it, but he couldn't tell. But he mentioned that the one that he had tapped was definitely one used for ashes. It had scripts on it for like safe passage to heaven, from what I could make out. After I stopped freaking out, I went and picked first dibs on the biggest room, as per my usual, but noticed that there were heaps of mirrors all around the room. Again, another thing. Not sure if this is a Chinese thing, but we don't like sleeping with mirrors facing us when we're in bed, if we can help it. So I went to move one of the mirrors, which was right in front of the bed. It was leaning against the door, so when I took the mirror off, the door actually opened ajar a little bit. That freaked me out. I got my dad, and we decided it's better I slept with my mom in another room, and he would take this room with my brother. Again, my dad being dad, he opened the door a little and shouted, "Hello?" before I told him to shut up. I had a peek inside, but couldn't make out much. Only that it was dusty and seemed to be a part of the other half of the house. My dad soon put a chair and a suitcase on top of it, in front of the door to keep it shut. Fast forward to the night. Everyone was sleepy and went to bed. I stayed up a bit because I had some emails from work to catch up on, and I went to go work in the living room. At this point, it was around 11 p.m. I remember that there were a few thumps on the roof, which sounded like footsteps, then followed by the loudest, most horrendous noise. It sounded like a train stopped on top of me. It was screeching like steel on steel that lasted maybe 30 seconds. I froze at this point, didn't know what to do. I thought that my dad would come check on me, but he never did. I didn't say anything the next morning because I thought I may have imagined it out of my tiredness. The following night, same thing, except I was in bed this time, just got into it. It was around this time that the same exact noise started up again. My mom woke up, but was frozen like me. My dad came in to check on us, and we were all just frozen listening to the noise, wondering what the hell it was. After it stopped, we were freaked out, but managed to shrug it off and went to sleep. Before I fell asleep, I remember hearing some faint thumps that stopped shortly after it started. The next morning, we kind of had a meeting of some sorts to discuss this. This is when I told them about the night before. We were all extremely unsettled at this point, and luckily, it was checkout day. We got the hell out of there and never found out what it was. The creepiest thing was, after we packed up and were well away from this place, Dad was driving, but he looked really disturbed. So I asked him if he was okay, and he said, "I am now, but I did not have good sleep last night." I pressed on and asked him, was it the noise? He said no, that didn't bother him as much compared to another thing that he had experienced. What bothered him the most was, when he left for our tour on the second day, he still had the suitcase on the top of the chair blocking the door in his room. He had just showered, so he had left the towel on the chair to hang. He said that when he came back, he noticed that the door was slightly ajar. The chair had been moved slightly, and the towel was now on the floor, as if someone was trying to push it from the other side. I forced him to ask the host about the noise on the other side of the door. She replied that the door was to her art room, and the noises just were a possum on the roof. I don't really believe her. The noises did not seem like some animal. I work from home, doing beauty treatments. Last summer, I was working 6 to 7 days a week, 9:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m., doing nails and drowning in a god-awful chemical smell. I would end each night airing my house out with all the windows open for a few hours. One night I sat on my sofa while the place airs and browsing on my laptop for TV unit. I had just moved a few months before. As I slouch down on the sofa, a creepy feeling rolls over me. Something at the corner of my eye catches my attention. I look to my window and I notice that my blinds are bent inwards, revealing a black slit of the outside. I stare deeply into the darkness, trying to figure out if my blinds got caught, when I hear a man's voice say, "Hey there." I instantly look away, heart pounding. The blinds fall back into place, and I hear fading footsteps as he walks away. God only knows how long he had been standing there, watching me. I was so terrified, and immediately rushed around and closed all my windows. When I was closing the window to my beauty room, I noticed a man a few meters away, crouched down and shining a torch under the tree. A few minutes later, there was tapping on my now closed kitchen window. I didn't check it out. I was too scared. I still don't know if the guy under the tree was the guy that said hey there, or someone just looking for a lost pet perhaps. There was also a guy who had been going around beating and mutilating cats around the same time. So I was extra on edge and called the non-emergency line to log it and slept with a knife that night. Okay, so last year I was coming home late, 11:30 or so. Just me and my roommate lived there. I'm the only one home at the time. I go to the kitchen to make dinner and get halfway upstairs. I hear a pounding at the door. I never answer the door because I never invite anyone over, so I just ignored it. I turn the hallway light off and the pounding gets worse. I know you're in there. Don't ignore me. I quickly close the bedroom door. I somehow move heavy furniture in front of the bedroom door, a big chest of drawers, and I grab a hammer. The pounding gets louder and louder, as if the person was throwing his body against the very solid door. I call my mom, who then tells me to call the cops. The noise had stopped right when I called the cops. I tell them that someone's trying to break into my home, and just then the noise starts up again. The screaming and yelling, throwing his body against the door. Slightly nervous that the stranger might use the sliding glass door, which my roommate never locks. And thank God it was locked this time. I stay on the phone with the dispatcher as the guy keeps yelling off his head. I can see his car still from my window. I saw you turn out the lights. I know you're in there. Let me in. I'm sorry. Let me the fuck in, you bitch. Well, by the time the cops came, the man had already left. I somehow get downstairs to talk to the cop. They end up finding the guy parked down the street from the house. They ask if I know him. I didn't, but my roommate does. It's her daughter's boyfriend, who had came to apologize about smashing and breaking her hand in the car door. Well, they didn't arrest him because he didn't really do anything. I ended up filing for a restraining order against the guy. This was about 2 years ago. I worked at a hair salon and a restaurant opened right next to our store. The food was pretty good, and we would stop there for lunch once in a while. Well, every now and then the dishwasher would come out from the back of the restaurant to watch us. Didn't bother us, just watched us. He always seemed kind of creepy to me from the get-go. Wore a big clear apron around himself and it just looked grimy. Hair unkempt, dirty mustache, really old. One day I went by myself and was short on cash to get some extra chicken for my burrito, so I opted not to get it. I take my food back to the salon. All of a sudden, one of the other employees comes back and gets me a thing of chicken. The dishwasher guy came in and said he wanted you to have this. Great. I kind of was confused by this, as the guy seemed strange. I didn't eat the chicken. Well, one day, I'm walking back to my car and notice the cops around. Someone had gotten arrested in the parking lot, so I kind of take my time getting to my car. Well, who walks up to me but the dishwasher guy? He tries to strike up a conversation with me. How are you? How was work? Why are the cops here? I made up answers quick. Are you seeing anyone? I reply yes, I'm in a relationship with my boyfriend. I quickly say goodnight and get into my car and leave. Figured it was the end of that, but nope. This is how our meetings went. He tried to talk to me, and I'd get in my car. He'd make sure to take out the trash the same times I always did. I used to acknowledge him, wave once or twice, try to be nice, but it got so repetitive, and he tried to watch me in the restaurant, like purposely walk out of the back. I didn't go out as often, or would have someone else pick up my food. The big joke at the salon was my creepy boyfriend. We all joked about it. We all knew he had put me on edge, but hadn't done anything bad yet. So I started to ignore him. Well, the dishwasher guy got even stranger. He started watching me work through the salon window after he would take out the trash, just standing there. Thank God I have a male employee to walk me to my car at this point. And when that didn't work, I would go to the coffee shop next door and have one of them walk me to my car. I was starting to get anxious about running into this guy because I would always randomly run into him. The dishwasher guy came in one day when I was off and seemed disappointed, but he got a haircut from one of the other stylists. Well, the restaurant wasn't doing well at this point, and the guy just spends his days watching me. The day before the restaurant closes permanently, the dishwasher guy comes up to the salon freaking out that he needs to talk to me. My coworkers basically tell him that I'm busy. After the restaurant closed down, I never saw this guy again. This happened when I was really young on a military base. All my life I thought it was just a weird and terrifying reoccurring dream until I mentioned it to my parents when I was a teenager. They admitted that it was completely real, and they just didn't tell me all this time because they didn't think it would matter to know if it was true. I was playing on the playground and my older sister was nearby, but not playing with me. There was an officer's son by me though, and he started somewhat being nice. I remember him looking at me really close in the face and getting a big smile before he says, "You have really pretty eyes." Now, little me is super happy and says thank you, and that's nice of you. Probably some vague compliment back. He was only a few years older than me. By the looks of it, neither of us were older than 10. He grabs a blunt stick that was lying next to me and pins me to the ground. It starts trying to gouge out my eyes within seconds. And it's at this point that I'm stupidly staring at him, confused and worried. I'd never encountered violence like this in my life, and before I knew it, the kid was holding my scrawny ass down and was talking about how he was gonna physically take my eyes away from me. It's then I start to panic because, can you even take an eye away from people? My sister shoves him off of me and gets me up to run with her away from him to our house. There wasn't anything we felt we could do when we told our parents because, again, it's an officer's son. When I'm a teen and all this is coming to light, they told me that they did talk to the officer. They told him what his son did and that they didn't want it to happen again, but the dad was pretty entitled about it, and we just ended up not going out to play as much until the kid moved away. Little psychopath grown up, please let's not meet. You've left many nightmares. When I was younger, about 8 or 9, my mom would usually drop me and my friends off at a public pool. One of my friends was about 3 years older than me, so I guess my mom thought we would be safe on our own. One day, me, my friend, her friend, and her friend's older brother decided to go to the public pool with us. My friend's mom dropped us off at the pool this time, and it wasn't the public pool we usually go to, but we were familiar with it. When we first entered the pool, we picked a nice spot for us to sit. It didn't take long until I noticed a man constantly staring at us. I didn't tell my friends at first. I forgot about it and finally got into the pool. We had lots of fun. After spending the whole day at the pool, we decided to leave. My friend called her mom and asked her if she could come pick us up. We grabbed our things and headed towards the entrance. As we were heading towards the entrance, I noticed the man that was staring at us earlier, and my heart dropped. He was following us as we made our way out to the pool's entrance. Right when we finally made it out, I heard my friend yelp. I turned only to see the strange man grabbing her arm. He was trying to drag her along with him, but my friend wouldn't budge. I freaked out, and so did my other 2 friends. We started screaming and shouting until 2 lifeguards came. They pulled the man away and began questioning him. The man ran away and the staff waited with us until we were picked up. Let's never meet again, sir. I just got off work. Today I worked 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. Around 10:45 a man walks in. I've had previous odd encounters with this man, such as seeing him walk behind me around the neighborhood and him hanging out near my street. I had brushed those off since I live right next to where I worked and figured that he just lived there also, but I always kept my eye on him. Anyway, the man comes in and orders his regular pastry and tells me, I'm gonna stay inside and eat my pastry. For anyone who doesn't know, my country is currently under lockdown because of the coronavirus, and all dining indoors is strictly prohibited. Not to mention the bakery is very tiny, and there had never been any tables to sit inside, only a coffee bar that has never had space to sit. I tell him, we're on lockdown, you can't really eat inside. His response chills me. Are you alone here? Yes. I respond stupidly, but quickly try to catch myself. But my coworker will be here soon. A complete lie. It was only 11 a.m. and my coworker isn't scheduled until 1 p.m. when I'm off. Then no one will see me in here. He responds and goes back to eating his pastry at the coffee counter. I roll my eyes and go back to work, not getting paid enough to care if he quickly eats his pastry and leaves. 10 minutes pass, then 15. This guy is still in my bakery. I look over and he finished his pastry and has moved closer to the open space in the counter, meant for employees to walk back and forth between the front of the store and the employees only side. Now I start getting uncomfortable. I quickly text my coworker, who is a 30-year-old man who owns a lot of guns and treats me like a little sister. I look over again, and now the man is even closer and is now reading a book. He's putting the book in front of his face and peeking at me from above it, watching me. Multiple customers had come in during his stay. Every time I turn my back, he gets closer and closer, until eventually he's halfway in our employees only area. I begin frantically texting my coworker, and he tells me he's about 4 minutes away. I finally make the decision to text my boyfriend. I had avoided doing so to keep from scaring him, but now I was terrified. I sat in the back of the employee area, watching this guy. I held a knife just in case he decided to come any closer. Just as he takes a few steps closer, my coworker bursts through the door. A confrontation ensues, and the man leaves the shop, but continues to sit in a parked car right out in front and stares at me. I tell my coworker about the previous experiences I have had with him, and he had enough. He marches out to the guy's car and tells him the next time he comes around, it would be his last. My boyfriend pulls up at this point and joins in with a warning. So Matthew, aka my stalker, let's not meet again. This happened back in 2004, in northern Wisconsin. I was 16 at the time and out deer hunting with my dad and his friend Frank. I do remember this day like it was yesterday though. The dialogue isn't word for word, but the idea of it is 100% accurate. As a side note, it was one day after 8 people were shot, less than 2 hours away. My dad and I had a few different stands over an area of maybe 3/4 square mile. We had been hunting there for almost 10 years, and I had been going with him since I was about 5. Up until I was 12, I had just been tagging along. This particular morning, we walked to my stand first. It was about 5 a.m., so still dark outside. I got situated and my dad and Frank went off to the other stands over the ridge, maybe another 500 to 600 yards off. Sitting there in the dark is always a little eerie. Not long after my dad and Frank left, I see a flashlight from the general direction of where they were headed, maybe 200 yards away, and then roughly moving in my direction. I figured they forgot something from the truck or something, so I radioed to see what they were doing. We're sitting here in my stand. Frank is in the other one. So obviously the flashlight was from someone else. It isn't super uncommon and isn't really a big deal. Those woods get crowded sometimes, and there's a spot to park in that general direction. I turned on my light so the other hunter could see that there was someone there. He stopped. I see the light turn and go in a different direction. No big deal. I ended up dozing off for a while, since it was still dark. When I wake up, the sun is up. It's around 8 a.m. I sit there for a bit. I radio my dad to see if he's seen or heard anything moving. Nothing yet. A couple of gunshots off in the distance is all. I get up to go for a slow walk to get my blood moving a bit. Not far, maybe 30 yards out and back. Trying not to make a sound. I come back to my stand, sit down, and take a real good look around. Nothing's really going on. I finally look at my left, where I'd seen the flashlight before, and see orange. For anyone unfamiliar, hunters have to wear blaze orange during gun season. I radio my dad and Frank to see if either of them were moving around. Dad says no. I hear nothing from Frank. I grab my binoculars out of my backpack to see if it was Frank. It's definitely not. The guy is looking at me through his scope, rifle fucking aimed directly at me. This is a huge no-no. Massive rules we have all learned in hunter's education. Never point your rifle at something you don't intend to shoot. Dumb people still do it though. It's few and far between, but it happens. My first thought was, what a fucking dickbag. Thing is, even me looking at him, he doesn't put his gun down. Now I'm starting to panic, thinking I was going to be the next hunting murder victim. I slowly grab my rifle, get up, and stand behind as many trees as I can. I walk down a little path on the side of my stand. My stand was on a kind of a little knoll on the side of a much larger hill. I radio my dad, tell him what's up. He tells me to sit tight and stay out of sight. Obviously, as a 16-year-old, I couldn't do that. Every time I looked, the guy was still aiming in my direction, but was always standing in a different spot. Like, I would look, go back to hiding, look again, and he would be 30 yards from where he was the last time. About 10 minutes of this goes by when my dad radios me. "How you doing, bud?" Looking back, he was obviously trying to keep me calm, but at the time, I thought he wasn't taking me seriously. He's still there, but he keeps moving. I don't know what his problem is. My dad told me to keep hidden and he'll figure it out, that he would be coming up near him in a minute or two. That's when I hear a shot. I lost my shit trying to get hold of my dad. Did he just get shot? Where the fuck is he? Did he have to shoot the guy? What the fuck is going on? I sit there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. That felt like hours. Alright, come on out and head towards my stand. I peek over the little knoll I was behind and see my dad waving from alongside the ridge the random guy had been on. I make the trek on over to see what happened. Turns out, Frank was feeling a little restless and took a little stroll and ended up on the other side of the particular ridge that the stranger was on. Not knowing where he was, he had knocked his radio battery loose while getting situated earlier in the morning and had no idea anything was going on. The shot I heard was actually Frank shooting a deer. Dad said as soon as Frank shot, the guy walked off away from us towards the logging road. We helped Frank out with the deer and decided to call it a day. Although I was extremely nervous, the rest of the weeks went on with no incident. This all happened roughly 3 or 4 years ago, but the experience has haunted me almost every single day since it happened. I'll start off by saying, at the time, I was pretty young, single, and very keen to have my first experience with a guy. I spent a while looking through dating apps, talking to a few people until I finally came across a guy who seemed interesting, and we had a lot of things in common. I thought it would be a good idea to meet up with him since we had been talking for almost a month. Now, even though I was young, I wasn't naive or stupid. I was still somewhat very cautious and a paranoid person. But for some reason that day, I made what possibly could have been the worst decision of my life. I invited him to spend the night at my place. My parents were away for the weekend, and I had the place to myself, so it seemed like a perfect opportunity for him to come over. He lived about 3 hours away from my place, yet he was eager and almost desperate to come and see me. So he set off as soon as he finished work, which was around 11 a.m. The whole time he was driving to my place, I had a sickening sense of doom, almost as if something was going to go very, very wrong. I almost texted multiple times telling him that I wasn't interested anymore, but I hesitated as he was only 10 minutes away by this point. I jumped when I heard the car pull up, and I expected to be greeted by a smile once I opened the door, but he just pushed his way through and continued to stare at me blankly. All while my 2 French bulldogs snarled and growled at him, which they never ever do to anyone. Things instantly seemed extremely odd. He followed me quickly to my bedroom and didn't waste any time aggressively undressing me, which I hesitantly went along with, as this was my first experience with a guy, especially as he was almost 6 years older than me. Fast forward a couple hours later, he suddenly asked me if he could sleep in my room, which confused me as it was only 5 p.m. I told him it was fine, and I would continue watching a movie by myself downstairs. After an hour or two, I heard what sounded like furniture being moved around. I made my way upstairs and opened my door to find him crouching in the middle of my room and breathing extremely heavily. When I asked him if he was okay, he motioned for me to get on the bed, where he sat me on his lap and proceeded to place a blindfold over my eyes and put his hands around my neck lightly. I was already feeling extremely uncomfortable, which worsened as he tightened his grip around my throat and said, "Does anyone know I'm here? Do your friends know who I am and what I look like or anything?" I instantly answered saying my sister and friends who lived nearby knew. This was a complete lie, as I don't have a sister and my friends were unaware, but something inside me forced me to say it. After a few minutes of awkward silence, he stood up and gathered his thing, and I noticed that in his backpack he had tape, rope, and a handcuff, which at first didn't concern me as I knew he was into that stuff, but looking back, I think it was intended for something much worse. All of a sudden he said, "I think I'm gonna head home. I have a long drive and I'm rather tired." I didn't hesitate to let him out of my door as I was already extremely uncomfortable. As he left, he failed to make eye contact or say goodbye, and he raced off down the street as soon as he got into his car. I ran back into my room to check if he had left anything, as he left in a hurry, and found a note on my desk in the words, "Being nice is what saved you." At the time I had no idea what the note meant. Now that I think about it, I seriously think he had very ill intentions towards me. I'm still angry at myself for letting a stranger into my home, which is obviously a big mistake, and I immediately blocked him on all my social media. I'm just so lucky that I made it out alive. All I know is he's now somewhere back in America. I don't really know why he was in the UK at the time that I met him, but all I can say is I'm glad that he's now many miles away from me. I'm quarantined with my mom. We both are avoiding going out as much as possible because we're both compromised. So we just take short trips for any errands we need to complete in order not to go stir crazy. Today, she needed to get some gas and we needed a few groceries, so we both went. We saw my cousin at the gas station, and after I went to one of the pumps, I said hello while my mother went to go pay for gas. After she paid, I started pumping the gas, and we stood there chatting for a moment. When my cousin returned to the car, a man came out of the gas station. He was balding, unkempt, a patchy, short beard, and glasses, the kind you see in high school photos from the 80s. He was wearing a sort of tropical shirt with a notepad and pen in his pocket, and dirty khakis with a tan jacket. He stopped at my cousin's car and talked to her. She's kind of small, so I stood there watching until she got into her car safely, and I heard it start. My mom and I were pumping the last bit of gas into the car. Both of us didn't need to, but we both were glad to be outside for a moment. The guy walked up to us while she finished and said, "Are you having fun?" We kind of just glanced at each other, and said, huh, and swatted me to make me go to my side of the car. I didn't go. I didn't want to until she got into the car herself. The guy turned to me and said, "Are you having fun with your granddaughter?" As if he were trying to make a joke, but his facial expressions never changed. I just kind of gave him a blank stare and said, "That's my mom." I squeezed between him and the bumper and moved to my side of the car. He followed closely and said, "I just came here from Michigan. I haven't been here for 10 years. I got in and held onto my door. He stared at me for a while I was holding the door, then at my face again. He gave me a blank stare and said, "That's nice." My dog stuck his nose out and started barking at the guy. He's a 15-pound York, and he's usually sweet, but sounded like an angry guard dog while he was barking this time. "Is the dog having fun?" the guy asked. I held onto the door tighter and said, "I guess so. Have a nice day." I closed the door quickly, locked it, and my mom drove off, with my cousin following us. She had been there watching the entire time, waiting for either us or the guy to leave. My mom and I both remarked about how creepy the guy was, and thought he might try to jump into the car. I'm glad I went with her. This happened a few months ago. I was at a club for my friend's birthday, and we had a table with around a dozen friends with us. When we get there, a guy immediately starts hitting on me. He seemed super weird, and I had a boyfriend, so I politely declined his advances. Then shit got weird. While out, I feel like I see him everywhere, and it started to freak me out a bit. But at the time, I didn't have a sense of any danger. Fast forward an hour. I'm chatting with a friend from high school who happened to be the bartender. Creepy guy comes up and orders a drink for him and myself, which I decline, and explain to my bartender friend that we already have a table, so I'm good on drinks. Creepy guy did not like that. He gave me shit about not accepting his offer and that he was just trying to be nice. However, during his nice guy speech, he picked up my drink to refill it, which I again declined and asked him to excuse me while I chatted with my friend. I finished my drink, the one he picked up earlier, and finished it without thinking much more of the creeper. About 30 minutes later, I become sick and disoriented, and I had my friend help me to the restroom since I felt so dizzy. After a while, I felt sick again, and my female friend was nowhere to be seen, so I walked myself to the bathroom. While waiting at the door, the creeper swooped in and held on to my waist very tight and asked if I wanted to come to his table upstairs to meet his friend. I kept telling him no, that I needed to go back to my friend, and he began dragging me towards the stairs, telling me a list of disgusting perverse things that I refused to write here. At that point, I was terrified, but my legs literally did not work. He was carrying me up the stairs. As soon as he got up there, he requested his valet to go home. At this point, I knew I was in danger, but my purse was missing, and so was my phone. While he's waiting outside, the bouncer makes a comment about my behavior, and the creep shrugs it off as too much alcohol. As we are waiting for the valet, 6 of my friends burst out from behind the door and began screaming at the creeper, while one of the female grabs me and pulls me back inside. I passed out soon after and woke up about 5 p.m. the next day on my friend's couch. I thought I had alcohol poisoning until I went to the emergency room and found out that I was drugged with ketamine while out the night before. This guy intended to drug me and take me home with him. Since then, I have refused to go out without my boyfriend always around me. I avoid that bar at all costs in case that creeper ever comes back. And I know to watch my drink like a hawk whenever I'm out. A valuable life lesson learned from a terrifying experience. Back in the summer of 2010, I fell victim to unexpected predators. Predators so unexpected, I can hardly believe it really happened when I look back on it. It was a type of experience that made me question whether or not I would survive. I was out late with my boyfriend, Richie. We were both 17 or 18 years old and had just graduated trade school, where we also met. We were living together on our own. We were living our best lives, no matter how little money we had. We loved spending most nights with one of our best friends at the time. His name was Daniel. Most nights we spent with Daniel were filled with late night drives, munchie runs, and video game sleepovers. We always had fun, just laughing and being dumb kids. We didn't really party or surround ourselves with drama or drugs. We did, however, like to drink once in a while. I don't approve of underage drinking at all now, but I know it happens. It is reality. This particular night, we had done what we did most nights. We drove around in Daniel's black two-door Honda Civic. We were listening to Skrillex, blasting it all the way up. We decided to go to the grocery store to pick up some snacks and some wine coolers. At the time, I was texting my best girlfriend, Charlotte. It was around 7 p.m. and I missed her so much, so I asked her if she wanted us to go pick her up. She was off work and said, "Yes, absolutely." "Charlotte wants to hang out with us," I told Daniel. "Alright, we'll go get her. Tell her we're on our way." So I texted Charlotte and told her to get ready soon. I couldn't wait to see her. It had been weeks since I last seen her, and I knew that she missed me too. We did still talk every day, but seeing her is the best thing. We had talked about a new album by the band Red. She said her brother had bought it, and she said she wanted me to listen to it. I asked her to ask her brother if it was okay if I borrowed it, and he agreed, so I told her not to forget it when I picked her up. We arrived at her place around 7:30, and she lives in a mobile home community, pretty close to where we were picking up our snacks and drinks. I texted her, letting her know that we had arrived, and she came out of her place about 2 minutes later. She got in the car and we headed to Daniel's house. When we arrived, I realized that I left my wallet and the Red album in the car. I thought, it's fine, I'll get that stuff later. We sat in the kitchen and started drinking and eating some munchies. I had actually started to feel sick earlier that day, so I only drank one wine cooler. The night went well. As it progressed, we sat around talking and enjoying the night. Around 11 p.m., Charlotte all of a sudden said, "Shit, my coworker just texted me and asked me to cover her shift tomorrow morning." "No, don't leave us," I interrupted, laughing. She laughed and said, "I want to stay, but I need the extra cash." We tried to convince her to stay, but she asked if we could take her home. Daniel was really drunk at this point. I had my learner's permit at the time, so I offered her to drive since I was the only one sober. I figured it would also make good driving practice. So we proceeded to load up in the car, and I headed carefully to drop off Charlotte. We listened to music as always on the way, and laughed about how drunk Daniel was. He wasn't puking or anything, but he was saying many funny things. This is a great night, I remember thinking. We finally get to Charlotte's house, and I park in her driveway. We say our goodbyes and she got out of the car. I stayed in the driveway until I saw that she made it into her place safely. I was by no means professional at driving at this time, so I drove all the way up the street in the opposite direction we came in, so I can just turn around at the next street and make a wide turn to drive back in the opposite direction again. I was terrible at adjusting cars. Let's just say I really needed the most practice making turns and parking. When I finally turned the car around to drive in the opposite direction, I realized I positioned the car too close to another car that was parked on the street. So I pressed the brake pedal, proceeded to try to reverse away from the car I parked too close to. Just as I put the car in reverse, we all gasped as we saw a small, gray, and very shitty looking pickup reverse very quickly in front of us. I panicked a little because it was abrupt. I thought for sure that they were going to hit us. The truck stopped, and I expected the driver to reposition the truck and drive away. I was very wrong. All of a sudden, two young Hispanic guys, who appeared to be in their late teens or early 20s, jumped quickly out of the truck and ran towards the Honda. I froze. I couldn't process what was happening. But one of them came to my side of the car, the other to the passenger side, where Richie was sitting. I didn't know that the car was unlocked. I regret not locking the doors because as soon as they got to the car, they opened the door and started yelling at us to get the hell out of the car. They made us get out, in the fear and panic that was upon us. When I got out of the car, I looked at this guy in front of me. I felt the worst fear I had ever felt in my life. I looked into his eyes and could tell he was high or something. I saw so much hatred and anger in his eyes. I knew this guy was out to hurt someone. I made it a point not to make too much eye contact, but made sure I got a good look at him. He was about 5 foot 6 inches tall. He was thin, tan skin, and short spiky brown hair. He was wearing skinny light blue jeans and a blue plaid long sleeve shirt. On his face sat a round set of glasses with light blue tint. I didn't get a good look at the other guy because I was fixated on the threat in front of me. I just remember he had dark hair and it was about the same height as the other guy. I was so scared, I didn't even know what was going on. All I could hear was, "What the fuck are you doing at my girl's house?" Pointed at Daniel and loudly asked, "My girl's cheating on me with this fucker? Claudia's with this fucker?" At the moment, he and the other guy started going through the car. They took my wallet and the red album and threw it out on the street. I whimpered in reply, "No, we just dropped off a friend. We don't know any Claudia." He replied loud and aggressive, "Which friend? You're lying." I didn't want to give up my best friend's name, obviously, so I responded, "Maria. We came to drop off my friend Maria. We don't know a Claudia. Please leave us alone." I was terrified and careful about what I said or did because I didn't know if they had any weapons. I know we all had the same thought because we were all trying to remain calm. I didn't try anything, even though I didn't see any weapons. In my head, I knew it was a possibility, so I tried to remain calm. Before I knew it, the spiky guy grabbed my arm and started to lead me up the street. He said, "All right, take me to your house then. I want to talk to Maria," he said calmly. "Okay, I'll take you and show you. I'll prove to you that we don't know Claudia." We walked a few feet in silence, dozens of things going through my head. I was not about to lead him to Charlotte. I thought about running for it. I thought about pleading with him. I had no idea what to do. I turned around to try to assure him again. I said, "I really don't know Claudia." He didn't say anything. He just looked at me and looked back at his friend that he had left with Richie and Daniel. I guess he decided better and didn't want to leave his partner behind because he left me alone on the street and took off running back down the street to the other guys. I took the opportunity to run behind one of the mobile homes and try to get back closer to the car. I thought about asking one of the neighbors to call the cops, but I was hesitant because, after all, it was really late at night and I probably wouldn't get an answer, or maybe if I did, I would just get the door slammed on my face. Just then, as I ran farther down the houses through the back, I saw Daniel turn the corner and headed towards me. "Where's Richie?" I frantically asked. "I don't know. We both came looking for you." Richie then appeared behind the mobile homes too, and we were just so thankful to see each other. We peered around the mobile homes and decided it was safe to go back to the car. We ran fast. I ran so fast I could feel my pants falling off. I jumped into the back seat of the car without hesitation. Daniel had sobered up by the end of all that and decided to drive home. We were all so shocked, angry, and scared that we just all knew what to do and how to position ourselves in the car. I asked them what happened while I was by myself. They said they squared up with the guys. They fist fought for a couple of minutes and the other guys took off on foot. Richie said he didn't even get hit. He said that the guy looked like he was either high or drunk. We drove back to Daniel's house. We called the cops on the way there. They arrived 10 minutes later. I was shooken up. I was crying and my stomach felt like it was turned upside down. The cops took all our statements. They said that they'll do their best to get this solved, but we never heard anything back about the incident. Nobody blamed me for it, but I had several regrets. I thought it was my fault for not locking the door. I thought how stupid it was that I froze up. I didn't know what I was going to do when the spiky-haired guy took me alone up the street. I was terrified of what he had in mind to do with me. I didn't know those guys. I didn't know their intentions or motives. I still have no idea who the hell Carla was. I have regrets, but I know it wasn't my fault. We were all so young and hardly had any life experience. It taught us a lot. I'm just happy and now thank God that nothing worse happened. It's not my fault, and those guys shouldn't have done what they did to us. Well, I don't blame myself anymore. I think we just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. For a bit of background information, I'm a guy from Mississippi, and I was around 19 at the time this took place. I lived in a small trailer with my dad and brother for the first 16 years of my life, before my brother, who I'll call Gunner, moved out due to him and my father always fighting. After my brother moved out, my father and I moved a county away, therefore the trailer was left vacant. A couple years later, I started dating this girl, who we'll call Chelsea, and my brother was dating her sister, who we'll call Mariah. We all decided to move into the vacant trailer because at the time, there was no other option. We needed a place to stay fast, and that was our option. Keep in mind, at the time, my girlfriend had 2 kids, and Mariah had 4. This is where the story begins. My brother had, and still has a meth addiction, and it causes him to be violent and aggressive when he's high. The entire time he and Mariah were together, they would nonstop argue and fight. Several times it became physical and the police were called. All in all, the police were called 8 times while we lived together. Anyway, the first big event happened around Christmas of 2017. My brother had been high for 4 days and was trying to start an argument with Mariah just to get an altercation started. This is how he was when he was high. Tensions rose, and he wanted to take their 6-month-old son away and stay at her grandparents' house a quarter-mile down the road. Mariah wasn't going to let him take him in this condition, so Gunner grabs one of his hunting rifles from my room and puts everyone at gunpoint and says, and I quote, "If anyone tries to take Cody away from me, I'll fucking kill you." At this point, everyone froze in fear. He was standing there with a 6-month-old baby in his arm and a .308 caliber rifle in the other, pointing at me, Chelsea, Mariah, and the 5 other children. He then leaves out the back door and proceeds to walk to my grandparents' house in 30-degree weather with a 6-month-old baby with just a blanket. Chelsea and I drive down to my grandparents' house and end up calming him down long enough to convince him to give back Cody so we can get him home and make sure that he is safe and everyone else is safe. Not even 5 minutes later, my dad is pulling into the driveway where my brother was at to see what was going on. At the time, I was in the bathroom pissing, and when I walked out of the bathroom, my brother walks up to me so high that he pushes me onto the ground for no reason. For some reason, this just flips a switch. I get up, ready to fight, and my dad gets behind Gunner and puts him in the chokehold. Keep in mind, my dad is a big guy, around 5'11", but husky and strong. My brother is also 5'10", husky and strong as well, but he had his youth to his advantage, so my dad wasn't able to keep hold of him for long. I'm only 5'6", around 130 pounds. So when my dad is restraining my brother, I take the opportunity to punch my brother in the ribs as hard as I can, while I can. I mean, come on. What else are you going to do when you're this small in comparison? My brother finally breaks free and starts to swing on me. By a miracle, he never lands a punch, and I get out of there, and my father is able to subdue him without anyone getting hurt. He ended up just talking some shit and leaving with my father. The next incident happened a couple months after, around February. By the way, Mariah was still together with Gunner after everything that happened for some reason. I was at H&R Block filing my taxes when I get a call from Mariah, panicking, saying my brother had just beat the shit out of her and was cutting himself with a knife, telling me I needed to come home right away. I ended up getting home about 20 minutes later to find Mariah with a swollen face and my brother nowhere to be found. He came back about 10 minutes later and was wanting to get his belongings. I sat on the porch when he asked me if I would help him get his stuff. I told him, fuck no. Look what you did to Mariah's face. All of a sudden, he started swinging on me, and when I got up from the chair, he pulled my hoodie over my head like a pussy, and I ended up pushing him off the porch. When I got my hoodie off, my uncle that had brought him to the house made him get in the truck and leave before the cops got there. Mariah made a report to the cops, but she didn't press charges because they told her that she would have to go to jail too because of domestic violence. Yeah, sounds stupid, right? A couple weeks later, Mariah, Chelsea, and I were sitting at home, and Mariah asked if I would drive her down the road to get some weed. We lived in the back roads, where we had a weed dealer about a mile away. As we were driving to his house, we see my brother in someone's yard. Mariah wants to be petty, so she honked the horn as we pass. We pull up to the weed guy's house, and she gets her sack. And when we pull out of the driveway, we see my brother in my grandma's car coming downhill towards us. He gets about 50 feet away and swerves over into our lane. Thinking he was just trying to fuck with us, we think nothing about it until he's about 10 feet away and never gets over. So I hit the ditch to avoid him. He ends up swiping the car and pulls over and gets out and tries to pull me out of the car. We ended up going home to call the police because I had left my phone there. And the police couldn't do anything about it since we technically left the scene of an accident. I know, cops in my area are rather useless. We ended up totaling my grandma's car and completely fucking up the doors. My grandparents ended up giving me the car he totaled because my car was the exact same model as theirs and I could use their parts if I needed it. One day, while I was at work, my brother goes down to my house and takes the piece of steel and smashes out the windows of the car and even destroyed my mailbox. Once again, the cops didn't do shit about it. For the next couple weeks, my brother would send texts to Mariah saying that he's watching her, and would even stay at the cemetery across the road from my house and watch us at like 3 in the morning just to see who came over. My brother was the type of guy that couldn't stand anyone being with his ex. He went as far to sneak into the house in broad daylight while Chelsea and I were at work, and he left a note saying, "For Mariah, I'm watching you," while she took a nap with the kids. If you're wondering, our doors didn't really lock. That's how he got in. About a month later, Mariah gets back together with her ex-boyfriend and baby daddy to her other kids, and we'll call him Ricky. One morning, Chelsea and I leave for work at 6 a.m. and get about 20 minutes down the road when Mariah calls us, telling us that we need to come home because Gunner had snuck down to our house through the woods around 10 or 11 o'clock at night and stayed in one of the vehicles all night waiting for us to leave so he could get inside and fight Ricky. Apparently, he tried to pull Ricky out of bed, but couldn't because he had a hold of the end of the bed. When he realized he couldn't, he started talking shit. And while this was all going on, Mariah snuck out to call the police. The police came but didn't do anything because my brother told him that the trailer belonged to my dad and that he had the right to be there. A couple days go by, and all of a sudden out of nowhere, Gunner stops by with my 2 uncles, while Chelsea, Ricky, and I are at home watching TV. He starts spouting off stuff to get Ricky to come outside to fight him. So Ricky puts on his boots and walks outside. As soon as he does, Gunner grabs him by the throat and drives him into the kids' playhouse on the porch. I go behind Gunner and pull him off, and when I do, Ricky gets up and starts throwing punches at Gunner, landing a couple. They end up on the ground with Ricky wrapped around Gunner, choking him until my uncles pulled them apart. Gunner gets in the truck, still mouthing off as they are leaving, and is visibly pissed when he sees that his head is all bruised up from getting tagged. The next day, Ricky drives down to my grandparents because the kids had told him that Mariah had gone down there to see Gunner. I know, Mariah is absolutely stupid. He pulls up and Gunner is telling him to leave and that this is his house. Ricky says he isn't leaving until Mariah comes outside. Gunner says he's going to hit him in the head with the metal folding chair that was sitting on the porch. Ricky tries to call his bluff and walks up to him, and Gunner hits him, dropping him to the ground. Gunner gets on top of him and starts beating him until my grandpa comes outside and makes him get off. He comes home later with a couple of bruises, but nothing too serious. A couple days later, Mariah and Gunner get into another fight because Gunner was apparently cheating on her, and things escalated very quickly. Long story short, Gunner is chasing after Mariah on a four-wheeler, shooting at her with a pistol while she is in the truck with her son. Like every time before, the cops didn't do shit. Mariah finally wised up and moved in with her mom to get away from Gunner. And the day after she moved, Chelsea and I were working and came home to find our TV had been stolen. Mariah came back down to the trailer the next day to get the rest of her stuff when my brother saw her and stopped by to start another altercation. Things escalated again. Gunner took the keys to Mariah's mother's car and threw them into the field next to our house. She jumped into the car and locked herself in there, trying to keep him from attacking her. My brother took a brick that was laying on the ground and tried to smash the window out. Somehow, by some miracle, the window never broke, so he decided to beat up the car instead. After he got tired, he finally left, and when we got off work, we searched the field by our house for 2 hours trying to find the keys. We never did, so the car was towed, which cost $100. Mariah's mother pressed charges, and he was charged with destruction of property, over $500 worth of damage, which made it a felony. The next day our air conditioners got stolen while we were at work, so that drew the line for us. We moved into one of our co-workers' house the next night, and after that, the problems with my brother stopped. We were finally able to sleep at night, knowing Gunner wouldn't bother us anymore. Now it's 2020, and my brother has a warrant out for his arrest for not seeing his probation officer. It's bad to say, I honestly hope he goes to prison, so he stays away from us, because a year after we moved, we ran into him a couple times, and he was nothing but trouble both those times. I'm sure I missed some things, but that's the majority of it. The story might not seem as scary as others you hear, but it was a nightmare to experience it firsthand. Some nights I laid awake, afraid to go to sleep, in fear of my brother coming in and killing us in our sleep. Things had gotten that bad. For anyone thinking about trying meth, please don't ever do it. It will completely ruin your life in a heartbeat and make you lose everything. Take it from experience. It's not worth it. So today has been slow at work, and I've been killing time reading these stories. Maybe enough time has passed so I can share mine. I had a friend who was really into a cult. Unfortunately, I was the one that got him turned on to it. We had a mutual appreciation of the paranormal and all things weird, so I thought the subject would interest him. He started going deep into the subject, to the point where he wouldn't talk about anything else. He would actually interrupt a conversation and force the subject back to occult matters. Rude, but sometimes people go through phases where their interest is all they want to talk about. It was a mostly forgivable offense. I think I should mention that this particular friend didn't have a very large friend circle. His depression and introverted nature kept him inside a lot. He didn't have the best luck in relationships with women. His world was kind of small, and I did enjoy hanging out with him, so I did my best to be a good friend. I didn't want to brush him off because he was acting a little weirder than normal. Honestly, for the longest time, he was a totally normal guy. We'd chat and play games together on PlayStation. Sometimes we'd go see movies with my boyfriend accompanying us. We hung out all the time at the park. We went swimming, and overall had a good time hanging out. Things started to go downhill when he started to smoke DMT. I think psychedelics are amazing tools that can offer insights into your life, but they should be treated with respect. My friend got to the point where he was making it himself, and he was smoking it daily, multiple times a day. For those who aren't familiar with the substance, when you smoke it, you get transformed to a different world and an entirely new plane of existence. Your body and yourself don't exist anymore. My personal experience with it led me to see a dragon once in this kaleidoscope of a cornucopia. People see all kinds of things on it. Imagine what that does to a person when they smoke it 30 times a day. He started telling me things like he was the reincarnated Osiris. He said that he was seeing hieroglyphics all over the place. Apparently, he had an hour-long conversations with entities in his bedroom, even when he wasn't smoking. Of course, I was very alarmed to hear all of this, and told him that he needed to take a serious break. No drugs at all for a few months, so he could find a solid footing in reality again. At this point, I was still hanging out with him because he obviously needed some help, and like I said before, he didn't have a lot of friends that could give him that. He was also the black sheep of his family, so I knew he wasn't getting any kind of support from them. He was really close to his sister, and I did reach out to her on Facebook to express my concerns. I pushed her to talk to him into getting some psychiatric help because he was slipping past the point of no return. I'm not really sure if she took my messages seriously, since we didn't really know each other. Plus, she is at least 6 years younger than us, and possibly didn't grasp how serious the situation was becoming. In any case, I'll jump forward now to the part that things started to get real creepy. My boyfriend and I had made arrangements to hang out with our friend at the park. I didn't really want to go because I felt like I needed a break from him. I couldn't deal with it on that particular day. My boyfriend said he wasn't all that bad, and we went anyway. We get to the park, and he's his usual self, ranting about Egypt and made up gods that only he knew. He also had a large hunting knife that he kept fiddling with the whole time that we were on the walk. He told us that he had been using it in ceremonial magic, and that it helped him banish negative thoughts. This made me extremely uneasy. He would do this thing where he would take the knife and make stabbing motions near his heart or head, like he was mock stabbing himself, all while holding a conversation with me and my boyfriend. I think we were both on edge and didn't know what to say or do about it. I tried to distract him from doing it by bringing up subjects that might interest him, but he kept on with his ritual. Keep in mind, we're walking on a trail, so it isn't like we could just say goodbye then and there. We had to walk back to our car and drop him off at his car. My boyfriend had the bright idea that we should get some lunch after our walk, even though I was doing my best to give him a look that said, "No, you crazy fuck. Why would you think I would want to spend any more time with this nut?" But it must not have been very effective, or my boyfriend was just ignoring it. Not sure. Either way, we ended up getting to the car and going to lunch. In the car I was driving, my boyfriend was in the passenger seat and our weirdo friend was in the back. As we're heading through the busy part of town, where all the shopping and restaurants are, I hear the distinctive sound of a belt buckle coming undone. Then I hear the worst sound imaginable. I peek back in the corner of my eye, and my suspicions are confirmed. This crazy fucker was full on jacking off in our back seat. I mean, pants way down, bare ass on the seat, beating it so hard like he wanted to rip it off. Instinctively, I felt sick to my stomach, and all the nervous energy I had throughout the day popped up into my head. I was trying not to shake and trying to ignore it and drive through the heavy traffic. I kinda had a freeze response, I guess. The whole time I kept thinking about the huge knife he had in his pocket, and obviously he was completely off his rocker. I was afraid to say anything or confront him because I didn't know how he would react. This part is nuts, but my boyfriend didn't even fucking seem to notice. The whole time he kept rambling on about God knows what. I couldn't listen to him because my thoughts were 100% focused on driving and trying to act like I didn't know what was going on in the back seat. We got to the restaurant, and my boyfriend runs in to grab the food. I'm left alone in the car with our friend. and I'm trying to act like I'm browsing my phone, when really I'm watching and listening as hard as I can. We don't talk. My boyfriend gets back in the car, and I complain that I'm tired, and it's been a long day. Let's drop him off, etc. So I drive us back to our friend's car, and he doesn't get out of the vehicle. He just sits there. I have to get a little rude and ask him to please get out so I can go home. He gets out of the car and walks over to the passenger side. I start getting really scared, and I suspected the worst. He pulled a gun out of some kind of bag he had on the seat, and he just walks over to our car with it. I don't know why the fuck I did this, but I was so pissed. I just got out of my car and walked right up to him. I was maybe 3 feet away from him, and I could see it was a loaded 9mm. I kept asking him over and over again, "What are you doing?" Because apparently that's all my brain could think of. I told him to get into his car and go home. He never said anything during this whole time, just kind of cried and had this wild look in his eye. For whatever reason, he got back to his car and drove off. I told my boyfriend obviously we're never going to hang out with him again, and I didn't even want him to talk to him anymore. No contact. A few months pass, and he occasionally messages me through the PlayStation or texts my phone. He says a lot of random stuff, and I just ignore it. It turns out he moved to Tennessee, near Nashville. I don't know why. He had a roommate, and I think his girlfriend lived there. I'm not really sure about the situation. I think maybe he's turning his life around and getting a fresh start down there. I'm not interested in any kind of friendship with him, and I know he needs help beyond what I could offer. Again, I reached out to his sister and let her know that he had a gun. She managed to get it from him somehow, but it did little good in the end. I get a call around 11 p.m. one night that wakes me up. It's a man claiming he's a detective in Gallatin, Tennessee, and my heart skips a beat. I start sweating and immediately ask what happened. Apparently, my former friend stabbed someone to death on Halloween Day. I don't know all the details, and the articles about it are kind of sparse. The whole thing is really surreal, and I'm just feeling like I'm lucky that I didn't get shot last summer. This whole thing turned out way longer than I meant it to be, but that's the story. I'm still feeling creeped out by the whole ordeal, and I'm kind of feeling sick after writing this. I had an acquaintance in high school who had some issues. He had a disability. My school had a very progressive population, lots of anti-bullying campaigns. Of course, he was bullied a little bit, but the majority of the school was nice to him. He was very mean. He was constantly cussing at other kids and threatening them. I remember in 8th grade, we were in the same science class. We had to give a presentation on nuclear weapons and debate on whether dropping nukes on Japan was the right choice. He printed out pictures of the victims of the bombs. He kind of laughed a little while as he talked about it. He went into full detail about their deaths. Teacher had to tell him to stop and sit down. No one was laughing. Everyone was kind of creeped out. There was also another time a kid mocked him in the hallway. He turned around and said very calmly and confidently, "You won't be doing this when I show up with a 12 gauge. Are you Christian? I bet God won't save you." It sent chills down my body. From then out, I stayed as far away from him as possible. He lived with his grandparents, and they took great care of him. One night, his grandfather had came home, and there was an argument. The boy went into his grandparents' room and grabbed the .22 rifle and shot his grandfather multiple times. His grandfather died a few days later at the hospital. I was at juvenile court later on. I did something dumb and had to appear in front of a judge. Sure enough, I saw the boy. He had been locked up for a while. He was in a green jumpsuit and was handcuffed. He was being escorted into a courtroom ahead of the rest of us. He saw me and apparently recognized me. He smiled at me, but not a friendly smile, a creepy one. One that sent chills down my spine. I never saw him again after that, and I'm not really sure what happened to him. When I was 10, my female cousin and I were dropped off at the movie theater by my mom while she ran some errands in town. We decided to go see a horror movie called The Village. I am tall, so I looked older, and my cousin was 14 at the time. We got super bored and decided to leave, so we got up. We walked out and stood at the entrance of the movies and rang my mother to come pick us up. Not 5 minutes later, a couple, about 40, well dressed, came out, and we recognized them as being in the same movie room as we were. They walked over to us and started asking us questions like, "Why did you guys walk out? Did you not like the movie? How old are you?" We told them that we were bored, and I honestly forgot how old we told them that we were. We also told them that we were waiting for my mom to come pick us up. And they asked, "Do you want to wait for her at our place?" We told them no, and they asked, "Are you sure?" And something else I can't really remember. They then walked away from us, but not out of the movies, and started talking. A few minutes later they come back and asked us again, and then walked out. The dick behind the popcorn counter then said we couldn't wait inside, and we had to go outside. It was a really small, crappy place. We told him what happened, and he either didn't believe us or didn't care, because he still made us go. I think there's more to the conversation, but I can't really remember. I think my cousin told them that my mom wouldn't know that we were with them, and they said, "Ring her and tell her," or "We'll ring her and tell her once we get to their house," or something along those lines. Sometimes I wonder if they were genuine, but who asked a pair of kids to go back to their place? This happened a few months ago. I was at a club for my friend's birthday, and we had a table with around a dozen friends with us. When we get there, a guy immediately starts hitting on me. He seemed super weird, and I had a boyfriend, so I politely declined his advances. Then shit got weird. While out, I feel like I see him everywhere, and it started to freak me out a bit. But at the time, I didn't have a sense of any danger. Fast forward an hour. I'm chatting with a friend from high school who happened to be the bartender. Creepy guy comes up and orders a drink for him and myself, which I decline, and explain to my bartender friend that we already have a table, so I'm good on drinks. Creepy guy did not like that. He gave me shit about not accepting his offer and that he was just trying to be nice. However, during his nice guy speech, he picked up my drink to refill it, which I again declined and asked him to excuse me while I chatted with my friend. I finished my drink, the one he picked up earlier, and finished it without thinking much more of the creeper. About 30 minutes later, I become sick and disoriented, and I had my friend help me to the restroom since I felt so dizzy. After a while, I felt sick again, and my female friend was nowhere to be seen, so I walked myself to the bathroom. While waiting at the door, the creeper swooped in and held on to my waist very tight and asked if I wanted to come to his table upstairs to meet his friends. I kept telling him no, that I needed to go back to my friends, and he began dragging me towards the stairs, telling me a list of disgusting, perverse things that I refused to write here. At that point, I was terrified, but my legs literally did not work. He was carrying me up the stairs. As soon as he got up there, he requested his valet to go home. At this point, I knew I was in danger, but my purse was missing, and so was my phone. While he's waiting outside, the bouncer makes a comment about my behavior, and the creep shrugs it off as too much alcohol. As we are waiting for the valet, 6 of my friends burst out from behind the door and began screaming at the creeper, while one of the female grabs me and pulls me back inside. I passed out soon after and woke up about 5 p.m. the next day on my friend's couch. I thought I had alcohol poisoning until I went to the emergency room and found out that I was drugged with ketamine while out the night before. This guy intended to drug me and take me home with him. Since then, I have refused to go out without my boyfriend always around me. I avoid that bar at all costs in case that creeper ever comes back. And I know to watch my drink like a hawk whenever I'm out. A valuable life lesson learned from a terrifying experience.